Hi guys, welcome to Counterpoints. My name is Connor. I'm a science fiction, political, and philosophy nerd. I am a Marine Corps and law enforcement veteran. I love talking about alt media, politics, personalities, clashes of personalities, drama, military history, psychology. I love everything. I love the world. I love hanging out with chat and having a good time. And we are going to be watching Ezra Klein talk to Ross Douthat about Trump, mysticism, and psychedelics. This is a request from our favorite chatter, Sean Kaplan, and it's supposed to be a very interesting conversation. Let's do it.
That I have no earthly idea how to describe. And today's fits into that mold. It's a conversation with my colleague, Ross Douthat. He's the author of Believe, Why Everyone Should Be Religious, a book I enjoyed very much, even though quite a bit of it I had some questions about. And he's the host of the new and really excellent New York Times opinion podcast, Interesting Times.
Very interesting times, in fact.
Where he has been interviewing people on the modern American right. And this is a conversation about belief as it is intertwined with the Trump administration and with this moment of politics, sort of return of political mysticism, and the belief as it operates in our lives, Ross's argument that I should be an organized religion, and me talking about some things I did not expect to be talking about on today's show. As always, my email, ezraklainshow@nytimes.com.
I don't know about you guys, but I am entranced and interested only because I'm not a literalist. Okay. I am like a deist. All right. I believe in a creative and ordered force that set the universe into motion, but I don't know if that creative and ordered force cares about me or created an afterlife in which my soul can inhabit. I'm skeptical about whether or not that's literally true. It might be metaphysically true. It might be morally true. There might be lessons that we can derive from the mythologies of our ancestors. I don't know if those mythologies are literally true, but I'm enticed by people trying to like re-understand these concepts. So that's cool.
Ross Douthat, welcome to the show.
Ezra Klein, it is a pleasure to be here.
So last year, after the first assassination attempt on Donald Trump, you wrote about Trump as a man of destiny, that he was, quote, a figure touched by the gods of fortune in a way that transcends the normal rules of politics. How are you thinking about that now?
Well, there were other passages in that column that are worth emphasizing, but yeah, I stand by that reading of the Trump phenomenon. I think one of the ways in which my sense of politics generally has changed over the course of the Trump era is just I have more appreciation for weird forces that are outside, certainly outside the control of people who write about politics. You can't have lived through the Trump era as a conservative columnist or newspaper writer and not have the sense of how fundamentally unimportant columnists are to what happens in American politics.
It is a consistent,
it's a consistent
exercise in humility.
It is. But even beyond that, there's, I think you and I both, grew up in a period that was, I think, reasonably described as a kind of timeout from grand historical dramas. It was not the end of history in the totalizing sense, but the kind of Francis Fukuyama view of the post-Cold War era as one that had a certain kind of predictability and order and stability.
History felt under control.
History felt under control, right? And the reality is that much of human history is just not under control in that way. And there are forces that move through history, generally forces that move through history that are sort of hard to predict and assess. But I do think often they are connected to specific personalities. And there is some kind of marriage between particular personalities and particular moments. And the idea of a man of destiny, a great man of history, is a useful way of thinking about that when it happens, as I think it has happened with Donald Trump, the rise of populism, the crack up of the liberal order, and so on. The reason I laughed at the outset is that it's important to stress that someone can be a man of destiny and be bad.
I was waiting for it, man. I was waiting for it. So why everyone should be religious, that, you're already sucking me in with that. Okay. Because I think that religion is a a tool of morality. It's effectively like Iron Age, Bronze Age mystics telling us what they believe the universe has enshrined into like moral law. And some of those things were true back then. Some of them are true now. Some of them weren't true then and aren't true now. But you know, that's the way that you should conceptualize it. And then a man of destiny, somebody who transcends the rules of politics and power. You can think of other figures, and I've said this before: Napoleon, Julius Caesar. These are men who similarly like kind of transcended the rules and reshaped institutions and countries in their own image for better and for worse. And I do view Trump as a weak attempt to be like Julius Caesar or to be like Napoleon. I think that they share a lot of historical commonalities. And then he's saying that this is a marriage of personalities and moments. I think Trump is only possible because of the economic moment that we're in right now, the socioeconomic and geopolitical moment that we're in right now. We've experienced a K economy. So rich people have gotten richer, poor people have stagnated. As a result, there's this class resentment between the working class and the upper class, and the middle class is highly professional, incredibly well paid, and also incredibly difficult to access, to the point that middle class used to mean, at least when I was growing up, it used to mean people that were making like 100 grand a year to, 500 grand a year. And depending on where you were on that spectrum, you could either have like a decent life or you could have like a really crazy, luxurious life. And that was part of the middle class. Whereas now it seems like that whole 100,000, 200,000 a year tier has evaporated. We have one of them in our chat, Grassroots Hegemon, who's very kind with his time, his energy, his money with this chat. But he is a rare phenomenon because he is a technically savvy person. And so the working class resents the upper classes, and they're looking for a simple solution because effectively it's just gotten, I don't want to say worse and worse every year, but it's definitely gotten increasingly more stagnant and more difficult to access a middle class life. And out of frustration, they looked for a simple solution. Trump offers a simple solution to these wildly complex socioeconomic problems. That's why he was able to do what he was able to do. Sen Patty says, if you don't find religion, it'll find you. I mean, that's true. The problem with religion is that it's just a tool of morality, but also a tool of oppression and a tool of manipulation. I would say any ideology could be categorized as that, Sapient Green. This isn't unique to religion. As soon as you like, quote unquote, abolish religion, people take to political ideologies with the zealotry that they normally treat religion. Razzle Smasher says, atheist here, so I have disagreements with this, but that's okay. I still like you. Well, thanks, bud. If you survived my Nintendo segment and you survived my religious segment, we'll be friends. Don't worry about it. Karen Mosley says, the middle class, from what I've also heard, has been called the managerial class. They're not poor workers, but they're not CEOs either. Yeah. Yep. 100%. In order to be a part of the middle class, you either have to oversee a bunch of wages who are barely getting by, or you have to be very technically astute. You have to be very good at something specialized like HVAC or engineering or what do they call those guys? Electricians or plumbers, which is funny because those are trades. Those used to be looked down on. Now they're not looked down on because of how lucrative they can be.
Right. Someone can be a great man of history and be worth opposing. You can look back at Napoleon and say, man, he was sort of above and beyond in terms of historical forces, and also root for Wellington at Waterloo. That's okay, right?
How does it sense that Trump is a man of destiny? Because I agree with you. And I think understanding the interpretation of Trump as somehow mystic is very important to understanding his relationship now with the right. But specifically, how do you think it has changed the way his staff and his allies treat him?
I mean, I think that it is very hard to go through the kind of drama that Trump himself personally went through in, the world that ran. I mean, we can go back further, but let's just say the world that ran from January 6th through his return to power. And if you're on his side through the story, not come to the feeling that you were sort of moving with the wave of history, right? For people in Trump's circle, this sense of one, there's just a sense that it doesn't matter what the polls say or the naysayers say. Certainly doesn't matter what, squishy New York Times conservatives say, right? They saw the bottom. Trump was disgraced and ruined and persecuted, and he was going to be sent to jail. And then the next thing you know, assassins' bullets were, missing him by a hair's breadth, and he was making this incredible, unprecedented historical comeback. And having lived through that, I think it's hard to be swayed by people saying, hey, guys, your poll numbers are not looking so great. This tariff rollout, not that well thought out. What are the implications of, sending people to El Salvador without due process? Like those are sort of normal quotidian sounding objections to administration policy. And I think at least for some people caught up in the Trump phenomenon, they just seem sort of incommensurate to the reality that you're like riding a historical wave.
But I don't think it's just the external world and its judgment of Donald Trump. And you can tell me if you think this is wrong.
I'm sorry. That's like brilliant. That's brilliant and terrifying simultaneously. Grassroots hegemon, I can take someone who is a techno on-site and make them an engineer. Managers don't care about credentials outside of a few fields. I'm not a CEO, not an LLC. I'm just a guy who goes to work. Well, listen, bro. Yeah, whatever you did, it's working. Okay, so your contributions to this channel, both financial and in chat, are deeply appreciated. And I applaud you and your family and skill set for making it the way that you made it. Silver Jacket Man says, I tell you, Wellington is a bad general. The English hold on, I gotta do the impersonation. Listen, I'm gonna tell you, Wellington is a bad general. The English, bad troops. This affair is nothing more than eating breakfast. I went a little stoner with it for no reason. I don't know why, but I would love to see Napoleon talking in a Trumpian cadence. That would be pretty funny. Genuine question says Celeste Plantagenet. Celeste Plantagenet, York. Genuine question. Are all the men in here into autocrats? Seems like everyone here really likes Trump and Napoleon. I mean, not me. I don't like autocrats or dictators. Mr. Bombastic, I think, is being sarcastic. He might not be. For all I know, he could be French. I don't like dictators. I don't like autocrats. I don't like authoritarians. Absolutely not. I don't like Trump. I don't like Caesar. Okay. I respect Caesar, but he was still a populist who was cut down, let's be real, probably at the appropriate time. Now, because he was cut down, though, and his opposition was so spineless, they ended up paving the way for the imperial era of Rome. So I can still view Caesar as like a flawed hero of Rome who wanted to create his own legend, died in the attempt, and then made Rome worse for trying to create his personal narrative. Celeste Plantagenet, York, says, thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. You're welcome. I speak French, believe it or not. I lived in Belgium for several years. That being said, we are going to meme. We are going to say ridiculous things, Celeste. So, if you feel like we're a little crazy, it's probably true. But no, in general, I'm not a fan of great heroes of history, and I find them to be deeply flawed and wildly under the limits of their legends. So if you're talking about Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, and Trump, I find their real world consequences way more damaging than their, the life of their legend, so to speak. However, this is interesting because I identify with the criticisms of the squishy New York Times conservative columnists who are saying, hey, your poll numbers suck. Tariffs suck. These deportations violate the Constitution of the United States. But he's, what Ross Douthat is appealing to is saying that the Trumpians believe that Trump will achieve ultimate victory over his opponents and he will bring about an American economic renaissance because they think that the momentum of history is on their side because they look at what he went through, which is effectively he was shamed on January 6th. He came back into the polling and everybody kind of discounted him again after already discounting him in 2016. He barely survived the assassination. That made him even more popular. And then he ended up winning again. And so why would God or the fates put this man through all of these trials and tribulations and challenges if he wasn't going to do something great? I feel like that's like a pretty like instinctive, human, tribal, culty, religious thing. However, I understand it emotionally now, where I'm like, hey, this dummy did something incredibly stupid, and the people don't care because my criticism is spit in the ocean compared to the wave of the Trumpian cult phenomena. So how dare I, a plebeian peasant who will have nowhere near the historical impact of Donald Trump, how dare I try to moderate his momentum? How dare I try to restrain this great man of history? And even if they don't understand that consciously, they might feel that emotionally, right? Sen Patty says, liberalism is based, voting is mega-based, autocracy is soy. I agree. Oscar says, clarification on an earlier statement. I confused him with Reza Aslan. We'll shut up and listen in my slightly drunk state. No, Oscar, I agree with you. I thought it was Reza Aslan instead of Ezra Klein. But I was kind of curious. I wanted to Google if Ezra Klein had eaten brains with that Indian cannibalistic tribe, because it's such a weird, freakish thing to do. I feel like that, if he had done that, there would have been stories about him as well. Mr. Bombastic says Napoleon was still relatively better than the other conservative monarchs in Europe. At least if he won, it would have been unified. Mr. Bombastic, I think that there's underlying forces for why Napoleon wouldn't have been able to unite the continent after he conquered it. And I also think that for all of his reforms, he ultimately did just get tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people killed in territories that he ultimately wasn't able to occupy and then frankify. I think Napoleon was demonstrably Silver Jacket Man says, I think Napoleon was demonstrably one of the greatest military commanders possibly ever. That said, I don't think his imperial ambitions were based. Talented guy. Exactly. In Pachyderma says, I'm a dude and I practically fetishize liberal democracy. Yeah. Just to say it, Celeste, we were mostly being sarcastic. Irony and sarcasm is a huge part of alternative media culture. Conservative liberalism says France got rid of their king just to find a new one. Yeah, they got an emperor instead of a king. The light of enlightenment was visible for but a fleeting moment. Agreed. Yes, he pronounces my name correctly too. Excellent. Good morning, Connor says Shadow 2 Bravo. Ezra is an arrogant, who overestimates his IQ about by 80 points. Well, he's in good company. That's me too. Peter the Great also has a lot of lore and legend behind him, but he was a pretty terrible in many ways. Yeah, exactly, Razzle. Exactly. How come you lived in Europe? Deployment. My dad worked for Electronic Data Systems. Electronic Data Systems is the company that runs NMCI. NMCI is the email system for the entire Department of Defense. They might have changed it in the past decade or two, but they didn't change it at the time. And so he got an opportunity to work for EDS in Belgium. And we looked at it as an adventure to go to Europe. And so we spent 4 years in Europe when I was 7 or 8 years old. And so as a result, I went to the French lycée system where I spoke French exclusively for probably 3.5 years. So a very challenging time in my life, but I don't regret it. It's very cool. Celeste Plantagenet York says, Vive la France. I was just wondering, I like this chat and trying to catch it when I can. I learn more here than anywhere else. Well, good. If this chat, if my content, specifically the Counterpoint show, is a little bit too bro or gross or schizophrenic, Celeste, then I just want to share that even if you find me or my chat specifically too gross or weird, obviously there's Bobby from the Geedunk Show. There's Danny from the Geedunk Show. There's Hard Points. There's Men Talking Mindfulness. There's a lot of good guys on the channel. I'm just one of the shows. Sacred Snow says, Trump has a lot of the flaws in Napoleon and none of the admirable traits. That's actually why I think he's a weaker version of Napoleon. Grassroots Hegemon for $10. Thank you for the donation. My point is that I can find a motivated 18-year-old and make them a better engineer in 4 days than a 4-year degree through work. However, you need both. Yep, agreed. Sen Patty says, Connor, that was probably the most eloquent way of putting it for true magats. Yep. It's a cope. Agreed. Anyways, let's continue. I've yapped almost as much as our friends Ross Douthat and Ezra Klein, and so I'm going to let them continue.
Biggest differences between Trump 1 and Trump 2. is that in Trump 1, his own staff, the people who surrounded him, were perfectly comfortable thinking President Donald Trump is very wrong about this, that his judgment is bad, his impulses need to be foiled. We are the resistance inside the Trump administration. And in Trump 2, I don't think people around him are comfortable thinking that. I think there is both a sense that they're there to serve him, but also a sense that there is something in Trump, to them, not to me, that exists beyond argumentation. The fact that the tariff policy doesn't make sense on its face, the fact that what he's doing seems like a bad idea. Well, if you knew better, then you'd be in the chair.
Yeah.
And so the unwillingness to question him because there's a belief in either a mystic purpose to him, or that he has a mystic, like beyond argumentation, intuition about things, I think has really changed the nature of the constraints around him, or the absence of constraints around him.
Yeah, I think there's also a way in which the kind of mystic drama of his return to power is also sort of projected back onto his first term, right? So where, where the experience of Trump's first term, not just for liberals and Democrats, but for a lot of Republicans, was obviously sort of chaotic and bizarre and difficult and so on. But there were ways in which the results of that term were better than people anticipated. I think certainly they were better than I anticipated, right? I expected, as like a columnist observer, economic crisis and foreign policy crisis to sort of define Trump's first 4 years in office. And prior to COVID, they didn't. The economy was in good shape. I think you can make a case that his foreign policy in the first term worked better than Biden's. I think you can make a strong case, actually, that it worked better than Biden's foreign policy. And I think what's happened now is that not just people around him in the White House, but also congressional Republicans, people who, would have doubts about the tariffs and so on, have sort of combined the mystical drama with the surprisingly successful first-term record, put them together and said, it's both that Trump has some sort of, kind of mystic intuition about what to do, and it's also that we doubted him before, but it all worked out okay. Now, obviously, the problem with that is that one of the reasons it worked out okay was precisely that there were a bunch of people in the White House the first time around who didn't have a mystical sense of Trump's perspective or his goals or anything like that, right? And that is, I think, very clearly what is missing this time around. There are people in the White House who could play that role. I think a lot of people expected, Scott Bessent, the Secretary of the Treasury, or Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, to play the kind of role that Gary Cohn and Steve Mnuchin and H.R. McMaster played in the first term. But no one is actually playing that role as far as anyone can sort of see. And so in an odd way, the very success of sort of Trump as man of destiny is unmaking the conditions that made his first term a success. But that is itself like a dramatic arc, right? Like if you were writing,
it's all very
if
dramatic.
you were writing if you're writing the novel of the story of sort of hubris, right, and nemesis, that would be a characteristic way that hubris and nemesis would manifest themselves.
Well, we tend to think of fortune now as synonymous with luck, but you go back to Greek mythology, and when you are touched by fortune, when you get a fortune, when you speak to the oracle, it often doesn't work out that well. You get a clear prophecy that seems like it foretells your success.
Right.
And laced inside of that is your downfall. I think what kind of story, what kind of mystic structure you believe we're in? Is it one that is providential, or is it one where the gods often laugh at human design?
Yo, listen, this is my jam. I understand why Sean Kaplan thought that I would like this. This is fire. Is it providential, or is it the gods laughing at our designs? That is beautiful, honestly, because I think it's the latter. So hold on, let's break this down real quick. So what they said was Trump 1 had institutionalists that undermined his agenda, which I agree. I was literally going to argue that. I need to stop saying literally. I was actually going to argue that if they didn't argue it, which is that during Trump 1, you had a whole bunch of institutionalists who muted his agenda.
I think,
and effectively the state was on some level of autopilot for the first 2 years that Trump was in office. And then what happened was COVID was the crisis that was meant to indicate Trump's incompetence and his mercurial behavior. And as a result, we lost 1.1 million people to COVID. But what, Ross Douthat has argued is that modern MAGA proponents were able to take the first 2 years of Trump, lionize it, ignore COVID, and then take the mystic, prophetic, pseudo-religious momentum of the Trump ascendancy and then sell that as a platform to the American people. And there are people like Marco Rubio who could mute the Trump agenda, but they're not because they want to maintain their proximity to power. And then what I like about what Ezra just observed is that you can be touched by the gods and it can be your downfall, especially in like a Greek narrative. Greek narratives are often tragedies. The story of Achilles, he's one of the greatest heroes in all of history, whose name rings out for millennia because of how strong of a warrior he was. And yet the story of Troy is that he went there effectively as a massive egomaniacal a-hole who was wildly talented, lost his cousin or his brother, I forget who he loved like deeply and dearly in battle, in a rage, killed his enemy. And then while sieging the fortress of his enemy, was shot in the heel and ultimately killed. He was, he was believed to be impervious. He was believed to be immortal. He was one of the greatest warriors who's ever lived. And yet he died horribly. And so that's kind of funny, is to kind of ask, like, because in the American conception, we have like this like Christian, Judeo-Christian providential is what he said, belief about like mystic power, where people who are surrounded by the fates are blessed by God. But Yahweh, most of the time, particularly in the New Testament, is like a beneficent. He is a God who rewards, those most loyal to him. But the truth is, if you check the Old Testament, like the story of Job, there are actually like Old Testament parables about how God punishes those who believes in him and tests those who believe in him. And their providence, their attachment to power, their attachment to the gods is actually something that will demonstrate a tragedy to the masses. And so I love this question of, is it providential or is it the gods laughing at our designs? I'm arguing that Trump's presidency is effectively the gods laughing at the designs of mortals. That's what I think it is. I think it is God showing us our own hubris, that we could have let the American empire rule for a millennia in the liberal Pax Americana. Trump is he's the foil of our belief in liberal empire. Hilarious. God's such a jerk. Oh my God. Old School says Trump is just clearing the way for the real Kiwatts heteroc Elon Musk. I hope not. I would prefer Baron Trump over Elon Musk. That's why I held on to that comment. Sapien Green says the problem with Napoleon would be that Europe would be unified under France. Exactly. Sorry, Celeste. The French were based once at a time. They were, there's a reason why the Napoleonic Code is still used in Louisiana. There's a reason why the international language of diplomacy used to be French. There's a reason why the French army is probably the most powerful army in Europe right now. It's because they could be based if they wanted to be. Bro could find peace until he forgave his enemies. Yeah, that's one of the morals. Sacred Snow says, I love Tony 2004, even though it's wildly inaccurate to the Iliad. Yeah, me too. Mr. Bombastic says, I thought the book of Job is about how God literally doesn't care. No. Mr. Bombastic, the narrative of Job is actually that God does care, but Job is one of his most faithful servants. And so God effectively puts him through trials and tribulations. Family, he loses his home, he loses his servants, he loses his livestock, and yet he still praises the creator of the universe. And, the narrative, at least as far as I understand it, as somebody who was raised in the church, is that you are still supposed to praise and give deference to God and creation and order, regardless of the material benefits of your own life. That's how I understand Job, anyways. Grassroots Judgment for $10. Thank you for the donation, King. Says, and to young programmers and designers, your expectation should be that you never sleep while you're young. That is also normal. Okay. Trump as Nero. True. The God. Wow. That's the most French thing that you've ever said. Don't be. I'm harping and carping. I think you're hoping and coping. That's what I think. The gods are dead. F the gods. Yeah, they're gonna make you pay for that, Celeste Plantagenet. They're gonna make JD Vance just because you said that. Just because Celeste Plantagenet York, because she said that in my chat, it's gonna be a JD Vance presidency in 2028. Why must we suffer because of what Celeste says in my chat? Why must the gods punish us all? All right.
A mistake that I think some religious people make is to see a kind of force of destiny at work in a particular figure and assume that that force of destiny must mean that God, the author of history, wants you to be on that person's side directly. But in fact, if you read, let's say, the Old Testament, right, there's all kinds of moments when God is working through figures to accomplish something in the world, or sort of to move history, or the drama of salvation history, to put it in Christian terms, right, in a particular direction. But it doesn't mean that the instrument that God is working through is in fact the Messiah or the chosen one, right? Like if God sends the Babylonians to chastise the wicked kings of Israel, doesn't mean that you're supposed to necessarily say, "Oh, hail Nebuchadnezzar, you are the chosen one." Sometimes there are forces. I think you can see Trump in several different lights. You could say he's a man of destiny, and therefore he is bringing about, in some weird way that we didn't see coming, the new American golden age, right? And this is obviously what a lot of people on the center right wanted to believe when it became clear that he was returning to power. Or you could say he's a great man of history who's unlocking some sort of change that was necessary, but bringing chaos in order to do it, right? So I wrote a lot about the concept of decadence, right? This idea that, the West, the developed world, was sort of stuck in these kind of cycles and needed to break out somehow. But the reality is you often can't break out of decadence without a big mess. So maybe Trump is the agent of that mess, but doesn't mean he's, a good person. Or finally, it could just be chastisement for everyone, right? All are punished, right? As Shakespeare said. I think all of those possibilities have to be taken seriously as readings of the Trump phenomenon.
How well do you remember Batman Begins?
I remember it, but
so as a person,
the League of Shadows, right, destroying Gotham.
I've had this joke in my head often in the past couple of months, as somebody whose mythic analogies tend to come from the Marvel or DC universe more than the Old or the New Testament. That's just like, convinced me we're not being governed by the League of Shadows. And I went back and I rewatched the piece where Ra's al Ghul sort of reveals the whole plan, and he says, "Look, we've infiltrated every layer of Gotham's power structure."
The League of Shadows has been a check against human corruption for thousands of years. We sacked Rome, loaded trade ships with plague rats, burned London to the ground. Every time a civilization reaches the pinnacle of its decadence, we return to restore the balance.
We tried to do this through financial engineering and destroy Gotham's economy. It didn't quite work. Now we're back for number 2. And the fact that we are here is proof of your decadence. Right? The fact that we could do this, get this close, shows that you deserve what we are about to do to you.
Yes.
And I'm not saying we are actually being governed by the League of Shadows, but when you brought up the decadence, there is a dimension of that to me when you think about this in those almost like narrative terms, a sort of reflection of very dark sides of our own society.
Well, and I mean...
So hold on, we have people popping off because they're like, "Oh my God, is this a DC nerd out? What's going on here?" So let me explain for the people who are coming into chat. And Celeste Plantagenet says, "I won't give them reverence, and why should I?" Celeste, because if you don't give the gods their due, they will take it. That's why you give the gods their due. Okay, you are perfectly encapsulating the arrogance of the French to think that you can stick your thumb in the eyes of the gods and somehow avoid punishment. That's crazy pants, and history is filled with overly confident French people who God has punished. And so all you're doing is you're inviting catastrophe onto this chat. God, please do not punish us. Celeste Plantagenet does not know what she does. But I'm actually going to take this. I'm going to take this and I'm going to mull on this for a while. I do think that we're being chastised for our hubris. I think we're being chastised for our pride. If you look at the 90s, we won over socialism. It was so clear that mixed economy capitalism was going to, bring about the end of history, and that we were going to have this relatively stable time of, the Pax Americana, the American empire ruling the world through soft power and hard power. And then 9/11, of course, was, this upset to the world order, but ultimately, we survived it, right? We survived the war on terror. We survived the financial calamity of the war on terror. We survived the jihadist terrorist attacks that came against us. ISIS seemed to be one of the worst iterations of the war on terror, where it was this mutated freak of our consequences, and we were ultimately able to slay the beast for the most part. Okay, so the war on terror we survived, whereas Trump seems like all of the erosion of the creation of the hyper security state and the centralization of vast power in the executive branch was there to be abused by the next psychopath who was willing to proselytize to the masses that he was a messiah. And that's what we got. So actually, I'm not viewing Trump as, even this conversation is changing the way that I view Trump. I'm no longer viewing Trump as this incompetent buffoon who's been able to stumble into power through populist appeals, although I do think that's true. I think Trump is America's punishment for the way that we've conducted ourselves over the past 3 decades. I think in some ways we deserve Trump over the way that we've conducted ourselves over the past 3 decades. God has sent Trump to chastise us for our pride. Mr. Bombastic says, I read it as God messed up the entire universe. Everything is cooked, not just Job. Nah, wrong. At least in my opinion. Wait, is that a DC Comics nerd out? It is, because apparently Ezra Klein doesn't read the Bible, despite being Jewish. Justice is about, I'm assuming Jewish with the last name of Klein. Justice is about harmony. Revenge is about making yourself feel better. Rachel. Yup. Celeste Plantagenet York says, I'm just a girl. Yeah, I know, but that's that's the problem, Thinking that you're just a girl and you can defy the gods. No, you cannot. You are just a girl. It is not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some good Batman memes. That's what we need to be telling ourselves. It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me. Yeah. There's probably a good argument that the U.S. has become more and more corrupt over the years. Pelosi stocks, Hunter Biden's bribes, Trump is just everything taken to 11. Yeah. We are reaping what we have sown as a culture. $5 from Grassroots Hegemon, and we did successfully 3 effing times. Yeah, I agree. That's a good way of thinking. Yeah. It feels more, you can engage with the tapestry of life in the mythological terms in which maggots talk about Trump. You can engage with it more earnestly, because while they see him as some kind of messianic figure, you view him as a chastisement of the American populace for our sins. So yeah, I kind of love it. Celeste Plantagenet York says, but this is why I'm here. I need the men to show me the way, because y'all are the leaders, the headships. Teach this little woman how to be a submissive, God-fearing Barbie doll. All right, now she's just teasing us. Sin Patty says, me when God casts his gaze upon me. Ooh, woo, I'm just a little boy, zapped out of existence. Yeah, it's my birthday. You're going to zap me out of existence on my birthday? That .com bubble, 9/11, 2008 housing market crash. We are above and beyond this idiocy. Yeah. we've been reaping what we've sown for a substantive amount of time. I'm going to let the video play. I will be back momentarily. I just need to grab some water and use the restroom, but don't worry. Ross Douthat and Ezra Klein will entertain you in my absence. I will be right back.
I've carried on a couple of different running arguments throughout the Trump era that, are going to continue, I guess. And one is with people on the right who have a sort of League of Shadows view of the overall situation. It's like things are so bad that you might as well, unleash chaos, right? And you saw a lot of this in response to the tariffs, right? People, mostly on social media, right? Not real politicians don't say this, but people on social media who are like, fine, we need a 10-year reset of the whole global economy because things are so bad and so on. And I've spent a lot of time disagreeing with those people. I would prefer not to take the black pill, but I've also spent time disagreeing with the kind of liberals and sometimes, never Trump Republican critics of Trump who I feel like don't quite grasp why he's successful and how, what you need to do in response, because I don't think he could be this successful if it were enough to just elect Joe Biden to fix our problems.
Well, clearly
right?
that didn't
work. Right. It didn't work.
We tried that. And definitely trying to elect him twice to fix our problems was not the winning move. I was listening a couple months ago to Barry Weiss's podcast, and she had Louise Perry, who's a sort of British conservative gender and sexuality writer. And Perry made this argument that I've been thinking about, where she said that the difference between Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate is that Peterson is a Christian and Tate is a pagan. And I think this might be unfair to historic pagans, but the argument she was making depends on the pagans, but also depends on the Christians. So, but the argument she was making is that Peterson is, at least in his ethics, somebody who thinks a lot about the weak, who cherishes women. Tate is more interested in power, in dominance, in sort of driving his enemies before him and sort of fathering a lot of children for a lot of people potentially. And I've thought about that question, that sort of war between, again, sort of crude paganism and Christianity as really playing out right now on the right and in the Trump administration. There are ways in which those strands seem braided through everything, the sort of drive for power, for sort of renewed 19th century masculinity versus the sort of more Christian dimensions of it. There's, in a way, like Vance as a emblem of the Christian side of the administration, Musk is an emblem of its pagan side with his many kids from many different women.
Yep.
Trump is somebody who, in his both traditionalism, like as a person, and also his brashness and will to power as a person, sort of has both threads inside himself at the same time.
Maybe. I think, honestly, I think Trump may have come to some conception of belief in God after the assassination attempt. Just sort of observing his comments a little bit, but I think of Trump as just sort of persistently as a kind of pagan or heathen figure, much more than he is a Christian figure, notwithstanding the attempts to sort of claim him as a kind of, King David or Emperor Constantine, right? Like there's sort of an idea that you get from religious conservative supporters of Trump that, you have these figures in the Bible or Christian history who are rulers, who are sinful in various ways, but maybe in a way like I've been describing, sort of advance God's cause despite their sins and failings. I don't really think of Trump that way, but he is committed in an explicit way to Christianity. And Trump, to me, the bargain with Trump has always been, for religious conservatives, some mix of protection and support, a transactional bargain, and then more recently, a kind of hope that some kind of renewal of American dynamism can sort of bring religion itself back with it, which I will say is a hope that I have indulged in myself, right? That it's like, okay, you have different varieties of post-Christianity out there, and you don't want to ally with the Andrew Tates, but you do want to ally with the people who have sort of, big hopes for the future rather than.
Ooh, some of this is fire. Okay, some of this is straight fire. Sorry, you guys are having some fun. You need a schizo French woman to do theological analysis sometimes. True. True. We welcome Miss Plantagenet. So you're going to internet jail? What's happening? Did something happen? Don't fear God, fear sin. Fear both, man. Fear both. I I don't know if the creator of the universe specifically cares about my mortal soul, but I do act like I could be judged by the creator of the universe. It's part of the reason why I don't listen to my base impulses, because I'm just going to let you know right now, some of my base impulses are pretty terrible. So I have tempered myself through fear of divine judgment. But this is an interesting analysis that I like. Vance is effectively within the right wing, within the Trump administration, you do have a marriage of multiple right-wing sects. So SECTS. You have Musk, who has a very like pagan view. I would not be surprised if he was an atheist or an agnostic. He's also a polygamist or he's a polygamist, where he effectively has wives that he buys, and he has children by many wives, which is very Old Testament, very pagan. Then you have Vance, who is Christian. He's married, he's monogamous, he has his kids, he goes to church routinely, he observes the Sabbath, all that kind of stuff. And then Ezra Klein asks if Trump is a synthesis of both. And I think that Mr. Douthat correctly says, no, Trump is realistically like a pagan or a heathen. He's way more Musk than he is Vance, but he uses Christianity as a vehicle for his moral authority, which is how he gets Christians to be loyal to him. And Christians will often justify their loyalty to Trump through historical examples of sinful rulers who ended up being good for their religion. As a result, King David ended up being, he's one of like the most famous kings of Israel. He was a massive piece of garbage. He was a massive a-hole in 10,000 different ways. And yet he's remembered as one of the greatest kings because, let's face it, he's the one who, if I remember correctly, he slayed Goliath. He surpassed his mentor. He ruled for decades, and he successfully defended Israel many times. So David is sinful. Constantine effectively had, in my opinion, a deathbed conversion just in the hopes that he would be forgiven by the Christian God. But realistically, he lived his entire life as a pagan military leader. There was also a Babylonian ruler. It wasn't Nebuchadnezzar, but it was another figure that Christians often reference, who was like a sinful Babylonian king, but he protected the Jews when they were ruled by Babylon from persecution. And so it was kind of like this deal with God to protect the Jews and to protect Israel by having this sinful ruler. Yeah, it might have been Cyrus. Conservative liberalism. I do think it was Cyrus, actually, now that you say it out loud. And so Ross Douthat is saying that he hoped that American dynamism would bring back Christianity or religion in general. And I'll look up if there's a Babylonian king. And Cyrus, I do remember now that you're right, that Cyrus was Persian. Babylonian king who protected Israel. While no Babylonian king is known for protecting Israel in the sense of shielding it from harm, Nebuchadnezzar is a pivotal figure. Yeah, maybe it was Cyrus. Maybe it was Persian. Maybe I was just being racist. But this is an interesting hope that I do think has been co-opted by MAGA and by Republicans, is that the hope for the future, the hope for stability, the hope for order, the hope for religion has been rooted in the American revitalization that Trump promises. So regardless of whether or not Trump actually succeeds in that, they're nesting their hopes in his propaganda. So I think that's an astute analysis. I don't think that I would have been able to understand this without somebody articulating it, because to me, it all just appears as like cultism. It all appears as religious devotion that is undeserved. But now that I understand that, and I've heard Christians say this kind of stuff too, but I just thought it was so crazy that I would never really consider it. Whereas seeing somebody like describing it from an academic perspective kind of makes it a little bit more compelling to me, because I'm not watching them glaze Trump. They're saying like, oh, Trump could be a bad guy, but this is the way that his sycophants see it. And so it makes it easier to understand rather than seeing his sycophants praise Trump against all evidence to the contrary. That's racist conservative liberalism. There's a great scene that scholars actually call the Godfather scene, in which David organizes the deaths of his enemies from his deathbed. Yep. David was a ruthless piece of garbage. There was some chick that he had the hots for. I don't know if she was married or if she was just like the handmaiden of some dude that he liked but didn't like that much. And then he sent that dude out into battle repeatedly so he could bang this dude's wife behind his back, or his handmaiden, I forget which, and then ultimately did get him killed so he could hook up with his wife because he just thought she was hot. Same, it's Solomon. He turned to pagan gods when the Queen of Sheba came through with all her wealth and pomp. Nice. Nice. Yeah. She was married to a soldier in his army. Yeah, it's messed up. Dude, imagine you're running out in order to fight for your kingdom or whatever so the king can bang your wife. That's so messed up. Like, if God doesn't punish you for that one, I don't know what he does punish for.
Then a woke progressivism that just seems sort of inflected with cultural despair, right? That would be an argument that I think a Christian who, you know, was trying to sort of explain to themselves how they find themselves in alliance with Elon Musk might say, right? Like better Elon, who has some good desires and believes that humanity is good in some way and wants a sort of more dynamic future. Better that than, you know, pure pessimism. The climate change is going to kill us all and structural racism means we deserve it kind of perspective. That would be the argument.
Let me ask about the idea that what you just described, though, is pure pessimism. Putting aside the idea that climate change will kill us all, which I don't believe. I think most people, even on the left, don't believe. They believe there's a way out. You just have to really work for it.
Mm-hmm.
You give at the end of your book. And
he doesn't believe that at all. Dude, if you go on social media, climate change is 100% like a death cult. There are people who on social media will 100% say, I am not having children and I am only enjoying my life as much as I possibly can because I'm on the because the entire economy is on the verge of collapse because climate change is going to turbo F all of us. So I don't think Ross Douthat agrees with Ezra Klein's assessment of the left's assessment of climate change. But I am interested to see Ezra Klein's defense of liberalism or progressivism. Bathsheba was her name. Yeah. She was a handmaiden and he did send him to war to kill him so he could. Yeah. To be fair, she was pretty hot. Hey, you know, there's some good looking Israeli gals.
an account of why you're a Christian and why you're a Catholic and why you find it persuasive. And I find your account of it very moving. It's a thing that appeals to me about Christianity. And the account you give is about both the strangeness and the radicalism of Jesus Christ as a figure, how uncomfortable it is to read him, how challenging, how it's a religion about meekness. All of the rich man has a better chance of, the camel has a better chance of fitting through the eye of the needle than the rich man of getting into heaven. That there's always been a radicalism in that. And
I know the meek will inherit the earth is a famous line. I would say renunciation more than meekness, probably.
But there's a godly...
So hold on. Bud123 says eventually everyone on Earth will get fried due to a runaway greenhouse effect from the sun increasing about 10% in luminosity in about 500 million to 1.5 billion years. Okay, well, I'm hoping in 500 million to 1.5 billion years, we're at minimum a solar species, if not a intergalactic species, where we've colonized multiple solar systems. So Bud123, I'm going to let the people I'm going to let the creatures, because I don't even know if they'll be human. I'm going to let the creatures who live in the galaxy 500 billions from now, I'll let them worry about that. Silver Jacket Man says, my brother legit had the same view. Who can have kids when they're just going to cook to death in climate change? Yeah, dude, there's plenty of people who are climate alarmists who think that the entire planet is going to be fried in a decade. That's me. I will not bring children into the world. It's too scary. Well, so let's Plantagenet York. We were just talking about natalism earlier. You're leaving the world to people like me. I was working for a few. Who is Ezra talking to? He's talking to Ross Douthat, who is a religious conservative, I think, who's talking about the cult of Trump and how it has a whole bunch of like mystic elements to it that people have bought into. And just to give you like a brief summary, because I actually find it wildly interesting, Jen, is that he's comparable to people like great men of history like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, etc. And so oftentimes the mystic cult around Trump feels like it has that political momentum. And if you look at what happened to him after Jan 6, where he was vilified for years on end, where his polls were terrible through the general election, where he was nearly assassinated, where he ultimately still got power anyways, then effectively you have this sense of this great man of history who's like greater than the historical forces that are aligned against him. And therefore he has to do a great thing because he's overcome such incredible odds. And then in reference to that, though, when you do squishy New York Times columnist criticisms of it, it doesn't matter to the mystics, because to the mystics, they are so enraptured by the cult and momentum of Trump's domination that they don't care about these like minor historical effects that are assailing his attempts at power, right? And then finally, what I would say is what's interesting is they talk about how in the Old Testament and in Greek mythology, there's oftentimes great men, think Achilles, they're not there. They don't become great men in order to usher in a new era of prosperity. They actually come into society in order to chastise that society about its sins. And so that's actually something that I kind of landed on, where I feel like Trump, what is it? The grave mine from Halo. He's like, I am a monument to all of your sins. And it's like, that's how I feel about Trump. Trump is a monument to all of the sins of America. So yeah, I am wholly bought in on the narrative that it's a mystical, pseudo-religious, great man of history event. I just think that it's a bad event. So pretty funny. You got to put the kids in front of the AC. True. Interstellar, not intergalactic. Intergalactic is a lot further away. No. I mean intragalactic. If I sent intergalactic, I think we'll be lucky to conquer our own galaxy. We'll be lucky. We'll be lucky to colonize a few solar systems before we get wiped out. We'll definitely be lucky in order to colonize the galaxy. I think crossing the void of space between galaxies, those distances are so crazy. I think that you would be better off effectively, like if we had technology to grow humans and we knew that there was a planet that had another galaxy that had the capacity to support life, then you would effectively shoot like a life rocket at it. You wouldn't even care whether or not that civilization ever developed. You would shoot a missile at it that had like the human species in vitro growing inside the rocket, and then you would just forget about it. And if civilization continued on that planet, awesome. If it didn't, it didn't. It truly does. I have Telegram. The cult thinks he is literally Jesus's bloodline and also related to JFK. Yeah. No, that's kind of what we're talking about. Monument to our sins, so we need to find the cartographer. Exactly. I used to make a bunch of fun of Ezra Klein. I actually think these days he's a strong interviewer. He's very pointed and is a better podcaster than a journalist. Yeah. People can evolve. People can become better over time. So yeah, arc missiles. Exactly. Colonize the stars via ballistics. Yeah, I'm not joking. I'm going to take the high road and not make a joke about me shooting my life rocket. Nice. And then I think the last thing that he said was important before we get into, and he got hotter. Well, Gen X, there's your baby daddy. Ezra Klein's got plenty of money. You need to hit up Ezra Klein and be like, hey, what's up? I'm in my 40s. I'm hot. You want to be my baby daddy? Right? And then, so Ross Douthat said that there's this promise of the return of American dynamism. And I think this is particularly true with boomers and Gen Xers. They think that liberalism and progressivism and modern American culture is so nihilist and so like anti-natal and so anti-human that they would rather align themselves with a pagan degenerate like Elon Musk because he at least has hope for the future. And they're praying that the return of American dynamism will bring back religion, if not Christianity. Yeah, shoot your shot. Shoot your shot, Jen.
Of those who do not have power.
Yes.
And at the same time, then, there is this administration I think is very self-consciously tries to be frame itself as Christian, but people in it are, like J.D. Vance. And
many people in the administration
and I do not see in them, in the way they act in this world, this love of those who do not have power. There's the kind of putting out of memes where they've made a Studio Ghibli meme out of an immigrant crying, right? There's something about the interplay here of a self-conscious Christianity and a self-conscious mimetic cruelty that both feels like very appalling to me, but also unchristian as I understand it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the aspect of populism, right? Conservative populism, right-wing populism, whatever you want to call it, that does see itself in clear continuity with Christian ideas and Christian views, basically holds that it is speaking on behalf of the weak and the oppressed, people who don't have a voice in society, and those people are the native-born working class of the Western world, who have been asked to bear inappropriate burdens, beginning with economic. I'm just framing the case, right? Listening. Right. Beginning with the economic burdens imposed by free trade regimes that sent their jobs overseas, and continuing with the burden of, again, this is the argument of sort of social disorder and breakdown associated with the drug trade in a globalized world, the free movement of peoples that, sort of transforms cities and neighborhoods, and in ways that, again, fall most heavily on lower middle class Americans and are sort of avoided and evaded by the upper class, right? This is the narrative is basically that the beneficiaries of globalization are the equivalent of the rich person in various of Jesus's parables. And certainly Jesus does not hesitate at various moments in the Gospels to say pretty harsh things about people who have betrayed their leadership role. So the one reason I pushed back on meekness is, yes, Jesus uses the word meek, but Jesus himself is not a meek figure, right? And you can go through the New Testament and find plenty of cases where Jesus says incredibly harsh things about mostly about powerful people, about sinners, right? Where Jesus cleanses the temple and drives the moneylenders out, and curses the fig tree that doesn't bear fruit. You're moving
to the powerful here. What I'm asking about is the treatment of the powerless, which, even if you believe, and I don't contest this point, that many, many, many people in this country have borne undue burdens. Like, I understand that is central to liberal politics too. It is the cruelty with which poor immigrants are treated, the kind of laughing about it, that it's fine if you want to say they should be unkind to Ezra Klein, like a New York Times columnist.
Right.
I more mean that there is an embrace of mimetic cruelty, not aimed at the powerful, but aimed at other forms of the powerless, where, as I sort of understand the radicalism of this ethic, it is you should, whatever your border policy, there should be a profound compassion for, Haitians who came here fleeing some of the most desperate poverty in the world to work hard at jobs to build up a life for their families.
So hold up. I'm going to answer this before the other guy does, because I think that this is probably like fundamental to it. So Ezra Klein objects to the cruelty with what these quote unquote Christians do when they were doing like a Studio Ghibli thing of immigrant crying. But if you look at it, it's effectively I already know what it is. It's a lady who came to America and was caught dealing fentanyl. Ghibli crying immigrant meme. And so what happens is this woman who allegedly, I say allegedly because I don't trust this administration for shit, but this immigrant lady allegedly was caught dealing fentanyl. And so she's indicative of all of the things that are wrong with what's going on with immigration. Is she's obese, so she's obviously not starving. No offense to my fat members. You know, I'm a little fat myself. And so she's obese, so she's clearly not starving. She came to another person's country, and so this is not her country. And then even as a guest, she dealt poison to her neighbors. And so Ezra Klein and many liberals and progressives are upset by this image because you're effectively celebrating her sadness, but she is representative of the undue burdens that the oppressed middle class and working class of America have to tolerate. Because she came to this country, she abused our hospitality, she got fat off of our food, and then dealt poison to her neighbors. And so in a conservative narrative, she is nowhere near a victim. She's a predator, right? That would be the conservative narrative. And so they would view, while I do view this cruelty as repulsive 100%, they would argue that Ezra Klein is crying crocodile tears because he has no idea who this woman is or what she's done, and that he is unnecessarily compassionate to predators who are killing the working class through the drug trade. And so Ezra Klein is a useful idiot for the exploitation of the native-born working class of the Western world, who are being asked to bear undue burdens, not only the economic consequences of free trade, but also all the deaths of despair associated with the drug trade. So, and then this is something that J.D. Vance said. He talked about the Ordo Amoris, which is effectively, I think it's like a Catholic doctrine. I'd have to check if it's actually a doctrine or if he made something up. But it says almost like a Jordan Peterson level of quote, which is effectively like, you start with love small. Like, of course you can love strangers from foreign countries, but the whole point of it is to love your wife first, love your children next, love your community next, and then love strangers. And so your proximity to who you can affect is, you know, how you order love. Healthy in a first loving God, then ourselves in a healthy, non-egocentric sort of way, of course, and then our neighbor. The Ordo Amoris can be conceptualized as a series of concentric circles radiating outward from ourselves, beginning with loving God. Yeah. So that's the argument that they would make, is that this woman is outside of our Ordo Amoris, and we are neglecting our neighbor, our native-born working class neighbors, by trying to love this foreign immigrant drug peddler. Excuse me. You guys are having fun, so I'm just gonna skip that. Hell yeah, that's where I recognize Norm from. Sitting here still. Ah, you're the first person to recognize it. I just changed the spelling. Oh, what are you guys doing? $5 from Celeste Plantagenet, York. Take this $5, oh gods, and forgive these heathen men for my crazy rants against you. Thank you, Celeste. That actually does make me feel a little bit better.
There's something about the weaponization of cruelty against the powerless. It is what I am trying to get at.
No, and I think, you know, as I said before, I think you have what you're describing as Christian and pagan tendencies braided together in the Trump administration. And I think that not all, but many of the things that you describe absolutely reflect more of a pagan sensibility than a Christian one. But I agree with you that particular steps the Trump administration has taken in this term are not Christian, anti-Christian, and I think the forces, you know, I mean, I think it started with the cuts to foreign aid. I think you can completely justify some kind of renovation of the foreign aid program. Christians are not bound to support any particular set of programs, but I think the way in which the foreign aid programs were reshuffled and cut off and so on was a failure of Christian duty in a pretty obvious way. That and the core motivations there were just different from the motivations, the evangelical motivations of the Bush era, and reflected, frankly, just overall the decline of Christianity in American life since then. I will just say, though, since, you know, we're taking a pretty hard line of critique, I think you watch this happen all the time on the left in different ways over the last 5 or 10 years, right? Where people who I considered, sensible, good, well-meaning, moderate people were in a coalition with people who had more intensity, more passion, more zeal, who made a certain set of demands on them that led, again, people I knew and admired and respected to, I think, compromise their own values in ways that also had sort of real world material consequences. I don't want to relitigate. I don't want to relitigate wokeness, but if, I think this is part of the nature of politics in a landscape where there's no kind of religious consensus, there's no kind of moral consensus, right? Is that forces that appear to have energy behind them, again, to go back to where we started, world historical energy, perhaps, will sort of draw people who have convictions that should put them in tension with those views into certain kinds of compromises. But I agree. I absolutely think I do not admire the way that the Trump administration approaches any of the policies that you're talking about, from humanitarian aid to, the deportations to El Salvador.
I guess to me.
So I love Ross. Ross is not a particularly exciting guy, but he seems brilliant and insightful. Grassroots Hegemon for $20 says, while I'm glazing Ezra Klein, his new book, Abundance, is an easy breezy read and good book. If you like that book, also read or listen to Rory Sutherland's book, Alchemy. You will like Rory whether you want to. You will like Rory whether you want to or not. Conservative liberalism makes an important point. God requires 10% of your net, but it's a good start. I thank you for your request for mercy. And that is a reference back to Celeste Plantagenet York being very kind in donating. Brightest blessings. Thank you. I'll be an obedient daughter. Thank you, Celeste. Thank you for calming down. Please calm down. And I'm joking. You're being very fun in chat. I'm just playing into the misogynist memes. Biz D says, did you hear the earlier part about the tension between Peterson and Tate on the right? I did hear it, but I did go to the bathroom, so I might have missed it. But it's absolutely true that I am infinitely more Petersonian, if that's a term, than I am Tatian. And the struggle between the conceptions of like heathen pagan rightoids versus Christian rightoids or morally Christian rightoids is take about 10% off of there, Squirrely Dan. Agreed. But there are 100% anti-Christian policies of the Trump regime. I like the fact that Ross Douthat is being honest about that. That makes me feel good. But he also feels a little bit betrayed because he thinks that there's sensible, good moderates that were in a coalition with psychos on the left. Okay. And what I would say about that is that the summer of 2020, listen, in my opinion, the summer of 2020 did not affect me. Okay. I'm just going to be real. All right. I was already out of law enforcement. I'm going to go full screen for this so I can look you guys in your beautiful eyeballs. Okay. The summer of 2020 did not affect me. I live in Central Florida. The biggest downtown area I have is Orlando. Orlando had protests, but we did not have riots. We are a very purple, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, cosmopolitan area. And so while OPD, Orlando Police Department, is 100% accused of brutalizing some people, it's often not very racial. They brutalize working class trailer park people. They brutalize poor Hispanics. They brutalize poor blacks. The good news about our law enforcement is while they're engaging in police brutality, it's fairly aracial while they're kicking the shit out of the working class, right? They're equal opportunity police brutalizers. And so as a result, we had BLM protests, but we did not have riots. We did not lose billions of dollars. Our downtown area is not bombed out or Molotov cocktailed out. We avoided a lot of the consequences of the BLM riots in the quote unquote summer of love. We also might have had an uptick in homicides during COVID, but it wasn't, it was all left over on the bad side of town. So all the poor people who normally kill each other, they killed each other a little bit more, but that's really all that happened. And so as a result, I have been insulated from the summer of love. That being said, I know plenty of conservatives, including family members of mine, who watched the allegedly centrist and liberal media sweep for the BLM riots, like the fiery but mostly peaceful protest meme where you have like the black pundit who has a microphone in front of his face and he's like, despite me standing in front of a building that's currently on fire, most of the protests were pretty peaceful. Like that became like a meme in conservative circles for obvious reason. because you're saying that everything's normal, everything's fine, everything's going to be fine, but literally you're standing in front of a building that's on fire. Why would you ever accept that? And there's this term that was popularized during the time, which is a narco tyranny, where effectively what was going on was the Democrats were accused of pulling back law enforcement, of restraining law enforcement in order to allow anarchy to dominate the streets, in order to terrorize the local population. That's part of the reason why conservatives, including me, were very passionate about the Kyle Rittenhouse case, because the guy effectively went into a community that he was a part of. He showed up with a rifle, obviously, which can be antagonistic, but it's a show of force in order to deter other people from committing crimes. He actually is relatively disciplined through a majority of the interactions that we catch on camera, and then he gets attacked. And then when he gets attacked, he ends up killing the people who are attacking him. And no offense to liberals and progressives, but you guys kind of went ape shit. You kind of just thought that he was like a mass shooter who gunned down a bunch of black people, when the truth is that everybody who attacked him was white. Everyone he killed was white. And so there was this narrative of he crossed state lines with an assault rifle in order to hunt and kill black people for sport, when that had nothing to do with reality. And so a lot of conservatives took that very personally, were completely repulsed as a result of that narrative, and they stopped trusting quote unquote sensible liberals to call balls and strikes, because they had missed the mark so hard in reference to the Summer of Love, BLM, and Kyle Rittenhouse. And so you have that distrust that Ross Douthat is still articulating 5 years later, where he's like, yeah, MAGA's bad. Yeah, they're doing anti-Christian policies. Yeah, they're killing brown and black people, and I find some of their policies repulsive. However, I can't ally with you guys either, because you betrayed your principles so aggressively 5 years ago. Listen, truth hurts. I think that's part of the reason why I like this Ross character, because again, he's not like an Andrew Tate. He's not a Jordan Peterson. He's not, giving us a bunch of memes, but he seems like a really intelligent, insightful person. I understand why Sean Kaplan asked us to watch this, because number one, already it makes me understand the Trump phenomena infinitely better, and I might be able to communicate better about it. And then number two, it's interesting to see a principled religious conservative struggling with what Make America Great Again is, versus the principles that he wants to see engendered in the society that MAGA could be a vehicle for, but then ultimately being disappointed with the real world results. So yeah, I find that wildly interesting. This is actually an incredibly intelligent and insightful conversation. This is the first that I have heard of him being a part of the community. Well, Gen X, I would say that you need to get out of your bubble a little bit. So Kyle Rittenhouse, I'll show you. Let me share screen. He lived in Northern Illinois, but he's from, or the conflict was in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Let me share my screen. Where did Kyle Rittenhouse live? Antioch, Illinois. So let's do Antioch, Illinois maps. So, yep. And this is where, Jen, I'm going to challenge you to get outside of your information bubble. You say that you're a fan of Destiny. I'm pretty sure Destiny talked about this a few times, okay? So here's Antioch. This is allegedly where Kyle Rittenhouse lives. This is the Wisconsin-Illinois border. His city is literally on the Wisconsin-Illinois border. This is Kenosha, which, let's face it, Kenosha, Wisconsin, which, by the way, I think it's probably beautiful. This is Chicago. So the argument was, because he's from Illinois, he must be around Chicago. So he drove, 2 hours through heavy traffic in order to get to Kenosha. And that's not what happened at all. He worked as a lifeguard in Kenosha. He went to Kenosha and did, cleanup from the riots the previous days. I think somebody in chat says his father was employed in Kenosha and lived in Kenosha. And then also he worked there as a lifeguard. So he did a 20 to 30 minute commute into Kenosha, Wisconsin in order to work. So acting like he has no ties to this community. I would show you where I live, but this is like saying that I have no ties to Lake County. I live in Orange County. I worked in Lake County. Lake County is 45 minutes away, and it's a pain in the ass commute. But if there was something popping off in Mount Dora and some of my friends said, hey, bro, you know, we know you don't live in Mount Dora, but can you swing by and help us out? My answer is going to be 100% yes. It's a 45-minute drive. It's not that big of a deal. So, yeah. Liberals had held down the fort. Progressives were the ones losing their minds. I mean, I agree. But I feel like let's be real, the progressives went a little crazy. 2020, they went a little crazy, okay? The George Floyd riots caused over $1 billion in damage, according to Axios, and was the most expensive in insurance history. Yeah. His father lived in Kenosha, and he previously worked there. Yep. I was talking smack to the gods. Connor was gently chastising me as to why things get taken from me because I was acting as an unfilial daughter. Yep. Get it right. No, we arm and patrol that border to keep Wisconsin on their side. They are jealous of our metropolis, and they will steal it if we let them. That might be true. This is why Kyle's defense attorney made the joke about the foreign land known as Antioch, which was met with stifled laughs. Yeah, this is Kenosha. This is Antioch. There's an area. I live in northern Orlando. I live in a suburb of Orlando on the north side. The suburb of Sanford is, I don't know, another 20 minutes north, another 15 minutes north. That's where that's where Trayvon Martin was killed. So saying that, like I've been to Sanford half a dozen to a dozen times. You know what I'm saying? Like I've driven by the neighborhood visiting friends where Trayvon Martin was killed. You know what I'm saying? It's not that big of a drive. Celeste Plantagenet York says, I drive an hour and a half for school and work, or did they before the gods took my car away? Yeah. Shout out Sanford. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The Silver Jacket Man says you can see your house. Dude, Wisconsin can be really pretty. I'm sorry. We'll get back into the content momentarily. I'm just enjoying the break. But take a look at this. Like, actually, let's just go to Google. Kenosha, Wisconsin beach. I'm sure it's cold, especially during the winter. But dude, this is beautiful. This looks crazy. It looks like the Great Lakes are so big, it looks like an ocean. It's so cool. Like obviously, I don't want to freeze my butt off during the winters, but the Great Lakes region is actually a physically stunning place. So, anyways, enough about that.
One of the things I'm getting at in life broadly, but in the policies specifically, or in the rhetoric, in the comportment, I think a lot about J.D. Vance, who's a person in many ways I think should have had some protection from this. I think he is Christian. I think he does think a lot about virtue and ethics. And you brought up the tariffs. I don't think there's anything unchristian about the tariffs. I think they're bad economics, not bad religion. Right. And a lot of these policies I actually believe that about. I think people can have very mistaken views on policy because they are just wrong about what the policies will do in the world. I have had mistaken views on policies because I was wrong about what the policies would do in the world or the way they would be carried out. It's more the compatibility between what I think has become a dominant tone. And I think we're in a unstable era in terms of what I might call our political manners. Matt Iglesias had a piece about the way a lot of his Hitler revisionism is beginning to happen out of a kind of feeling that we have over-penalized questions about race, questions of anti-Semitism, and that in order to widen the boundaries of debate, you have to have on World War II revisionists, right? And there's a sense that this sort of politics of manners didn't work. And so politics of no manners needs to be tried now. And I think Donald Trump has sort of been an innovator and a pioneer in that. And it's created a lot of mimetic imitators who on the one hand don't have some of his, I don't know, lightness or authenticity or funniness. But on the other, it's just that I think I am weirdly, even though I'm not myself religious, a little bit idealistic about religion. And I feel this about my own religion, which I think should create very profound sympathy for refugees. And that has not been something I've seen in the past couple of years. And I think it's a Christianity where it feels to me like it should create a kind of buffer against greed and cruelty that I often see broken when it would be politically viable to break in.
So hold up. The grocery touch mom for another $20. Thank you, King. Thank you for the donation. I have driven 2 hours to have dinner with my family, and Wisconsin is very pretty. Dude, we went to Milwaukee, and then we went to a Trump rally outside of Milwaukee with Progressive Victory. And Milwaukee, some of rural Wisconsin outside of the city is beautiful. Just like rolling hills as far as the eye can see. It was a little overcast. You could still see blue skies, but there were a few clouds in the sky. Horse ranches and farms as far as the eye can see, grain silos as far as the eye can see. Like, it looked like the perfect place to, if you could find a good school, it looked like the perfect place to raise a family and have land to have horses, maybe cattle, guns, off-roading, dirt bikes, ATV. Like, obviously, like, you might not be wealthy enough in that kind of area if you don't have the right kind of employment in order to enjoy that much land. But there was 100%, like, if you had a few $1 million, you could have so much fun in rural Wisconsin, because it looked like dirt bike, horse, ATV, and firearms heaven. That's what it looked like. Gosh, now you make me want to go fishing. Hey man, when the stream's over, go fishing. So yeah, like I actually think one of the moves, like, it's not a move that I'm gonna make. I have pretty deep roots in Central Florida, at least as far as my life goes. So I'll probably be staying in Central Florida, but there's a part of me that fantasizes about escaping to either Appalachia, like the Carolinas, or escaping to the Great Lakes region, because obviously land and housing is cheaper out there. And there are some stunningly physically beautiful places out there that aren't widely known by Americans. Kesoko says, Cleveland sits atop of a valley network, one of the only big cities with such scenery so close by this area is heaven, lol. Yeah, I'm sure. And plenty of people, they dog Cleveland all the time, but I'm sure there's moments of true beauty out there, right? So what Ezra Klein said, though, but this is almost like a temperamental difference between conservatives and progressives and liberals. Okay, one of my frustrations with liberals and progressives is I think they underestimate the threat of jihadist terrorism. Conservatives might overestimate it, but I want to point something out to you. Okay, so I lived in a city called Overijse, Belgium. And Overijse, and there was a town. So we were just outside of Belgium. There was a town that the terrorists were from, who did the Bataclan. Where were the Bataclan terrorists from? French police said blah 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 in real time from Brussels, Belgium. But there's a neighborhood that they're from. Okay. And that neighborhood, my mother and I used to shop. We used to shop for furniture there, because effectively the Muslim community, the Arab Muslim community, had a secondhand community. Maybe some of the stuff was stolen. We don't know if it was stolen, but effectively that neighborhood was known for selling really good secondhand goods. And so the Bataclan massacre, I'll try not to show too much graphic stuff, but effectively, it was like, I don't know, 200 people gunned down in a music hall, and they were from the neighborhood that I lived in as a child. Okay. I was born in Boston, right? And not only that, I've obviously been to Paris several times. I was born in Boston, right? Boston Marathon bombing. And the Boston Marathon bombing was another jihadist terrorist attack where jihadists put pipe bombs in the crowd and they killed like a dozen people, including like a middle school aged girl, right? I live in Central Florida, and the Pulse nightclub attack was 20 minutes away from my house, right? This is 20 minutes away from my house. Okay. And then I'm trying to think of what else. Obviously, I served in the military. So, I've been to Iraq. Al-Baghdadi. So Iraq maps. So I lived, this is Al-Assad Air Base. I lived in cans that were over here, little trailers. Oh God, this looks like shit now. They did not take care of it. Bastards. You bastards. They ripped this apart. Wow. Can't give the Iraqi army shit. Anyways, this used to be a can city. Okay. This used to be trailers as far as the eye could see. And I stayed here and I worked here. And in the city immediately outside, called al-Baghdadi, somewhere around here, they, jihadists kidnapped a bunch of people, put tires on them, and burned them to death in tires. So my entire life has been shaped by jihadist terrorism. And so when somebody says, hey, let's take in a bunch of Syrian refugees, I think to myself, yeah, there's probably like Muslim people, Arab Muslims who are totally normie. But if you look at support for jihadist terrorists, it's like insane. So what is it? Pew Research suicide bombing Islam. So Muslims and Islam, key findings in the US. And they have Pew Research polls about suicide bombing. I forget where it is, but effectively it can be between like a quarter and 70% of the population supports suicide bombing civilian targets. And so when you bring in a few 100,000 people from different areas of the world, and a quarter of them think that suicide bombing is okay. Like, look at this. Okay. So views of extremist groups, whether or not they're favorable, Jordanians, Egyptians, Palestinians, Lebanese, Indonesians, Pakistanis, and Turkey, the lowest percentage is 10%, where they think that Hamas is good, that Hezbollah is good at 5%, or Al-Qaeda is good at 4%. Some of these people, it's literally a quarter of the population. 21% think that Al-Qaeda is good. In the Palestinian territories, 28% believe that Al-Qaeda is good. That means that 1 in 4 people in Egypt and Palestine believe that Al-Qaeda, the people who blew up the New York City skyline, they think that they're good, right? Half of them think that Hamas are good, and a quarter of them think that Hezbollah is good, right? Then I'm trying to look for suicide bombings. Suicides bombing, Palestinian territory. Is it often justified to blow up civilian areas? Palestinian territories, 31%. Lebanon, 12%. Egypt, 12%. Israel, 5%. Jordan, 4%. Indonesia, 2%. Turkey, 2%. Pakistan, 2%. Dude, 4% of the population in Pakistan believes that it is sometimes or often justified to blow up civilians. That's crazy. And some of that 10%, 13, 20, 28, 32, 40. Dude, some of these regions, suicide bombing is supported as much as 70%. Right? That's bananas. All right. So when you tell me you are insufficiently sympathetic to 250,000, Syrian refugees who are coming into the United States because they need to escape the Syrian civil war, what I think to myself is that there will, as a result of bringing in 250,000 Syrian refugees, there 100% is going to be a jihadist terrorist attack that is going to slaughter dozens of innocent people. So why would I want that? Why would I want that in my country? Where I was raised was bombed and slaughtered. Overijssel in Belgium, that's where the terrorists grew up who did the Bataclan massacre, and not even to mention the Bastille attack. Then the place that I was born has been attacked. The place that I live has been attacked. The place that I served has been attacked. Why would I invite jihadists as neighbors? It's never going to happen. So anyways, Sorry for going on an anti-jihadist rant, but I do think it's important. Then I did see Celeste say, serious question to the men here. If you were a single woman who happens to be a demon rat living in Trump's America, seeing what's happening and all, would you move out of the country for your safety? No. No, Celeste. I'm going to answer that question. No. You'll be fine. In 2 years, the Democrats will probably take both houses of Congress back. Trump will be a lame duck, and then he'll be gone in 4 years. And whatever comes after Trump is not going to be Trumpian. Okay. If you live in Mississippi, move to California. If you live in California, you're fine. If you live in New York, you're fine. Move to a blue state if you care about abortion. Okay. That's the solution, not moving out of country. Anyways. Yeah. K Soko says, if you ever come to Cleveland, eat at Gallucci's. It's an Italian market and they make prepared food. Awesome. Silver Jacket Man says Pakistan funds like half the terrorist groups, mostly to destabilize Afghanistan. When people gripe that U.S. funded Al-Qaeda, that's inaccurate. We funded Pakistan, who then funded Al-Qaeda. Yeah. Yep. All right. Anyways, that's enough anti-jihadist propaganda. But effectively, when Ezra Klein says, I don't understand why you're so hostile to immigrants or refugees from the Middle East and North Africa, I just explained why conservatives are not interested in living side by side with jihadists.
Right. So, well, two things. One is that, yes, you are describing the story of both Judaism and Christianity's engagement with history and fallen human nature, right? And this is something that is, in fact, advertised in both the Old Testament and the New Testament and all.
Not even France? What do you mean, not even France? Well, I mean, are you a dual citizen? If you're a dual citizen, yeah, sure, go back to France. But if you're not a dual citizen, move to New York or California. Parts of Arizona are just California anyways. If you're in Havasu, if you're in like the Lake Party area, you're in one of the sluttiest, most alcoholic, most degenerate parts of America. Why would you care? You know? Lake Havasu is just California's vacation spot.
All of history since, right, is that the story of the Jewish people in the Old Testament is not a story of people who were chosen by God and given a bunch of commandments and then obeyed them all. It's a story of people who remained the chosen people despite failing in every possible way, including, to fit our conversation, repeated flirtations with heathenism and paganism and idolatry, right? And then you can obviously tell a similar story. You know, the New Testament, Christians don't have political power, but the apostles are always screwing up and messing up. And then, of course, the history of Christianity's entanglement with political power is filled with sins and failings that, again, like this era's set are sort of not atypical, I guess. But then the second point that I want to push you on is like, what kind of argument is this that you think you're going to win with religious believers who disagree with you? You're like, well, I don't believe in your religion, but I really wish that you would follow your religion so that your politics were more aligned with mine.
So true. The I don't believe in Christianity meme. I don't believe in Christianity meme. I don't know if it's real, but there's this meme. Oh man, somebody's got to tell me the keywords better. But it's effectively like atheists telling Christians to follow their faith more meme. That's probably not a good Google keyword search, but there's this really funny meme of like a soy jack, like telling someone like, I don't believe in your religion. And I think it's all fairy tale made up bullshit, but you should go ahead and follow your religion and be more vaguely nice to refugees. And it's a very like smug, liberal, progressive person. And, you know, Ross Douthat effectively said that meme. So I'm in a 55 plus community with my family. You'll be fine. You'll be fine, Celeste. Move to Lake Havasu. You'll be fine. Reminds me of white hippies LARPing as Hindus. Yeah, exactly. I think they had 55% support and needed 60%. I'm not sure in reference to what, but if you're talking about gay marriage in California, I remember that.
Like, that's just not much of an argument at all. And I think to the extent that all of liberalism, the ideology that you subscribe to, trades on inherited ideas from Christianity about morality and equality and so on, while you've jettisoned the portrait of the universe, the metaphysical structure that gives them meaning, I think it's really hard from that point of view for you to get anywhere in arguments with people who still believe in that structure, because you're essentially saying, I've stripped away the conceptual framework that makes your moral ideas make sense. But now I'm going to complain that you're not living up to your moral ideas. I just think that's a really weak argument.
Oh, but I'm not arguing it.
Well, you're saying it to me. I'm right here. I'm a Christian. I'm right here. You're arguing. You're expressing sorrowful disappointment that Christians are not living up to a worldview that you think is false.
Well, I think parts of it are. Well, I am unconvinced on parts of it. We'll talk about the view of the cosmos in a minute. And I'm not trying to offend you here. I'm actually asking.
I'm not. Ezra, does anything about our long relationship suggest that you could possibly offend me?
I've known you long enough to know when you're getting a bit heated.
That's totally different. Heatedness, I mean, as I was saying, the New Testament is filled with heated encounters.
I don't think a thing I'm saying here is going to convince somebody on the Christian right to turn around their view of Donald Trump.
Here we go. Sacred Snow says, fellow Floridian, how do you feel about the 2024 weed abortion addendums failing through despite popular support? What's the point of props if popular support isn't good enough? Valor Media Research. Well, I mean, we'll get them next time. Listen, the only people who voted down weed are a bunch of boomers. I obviously do have my concerns with weed. I don't consume it nearly enough. Even under the current medical framework, most people can get marijuana in the state of Florida without fear of prosecution from law enforcement. Of course, there are some rural areas where cops will arrest you for marijuana. But dude, access to marijuana is very, I don't know. I feel like that's, when I was a kid, the reason why it was such a huge priority was because we all knew other teenagers who were spending serious time in jail or prison for, effectively for dealing marijuana. And I think there are some negative health consequences that are popping up from broader use of marijuana. However, I don't think it's a big deal. I think we'll get them next time, basically. Same thing with abortion. Abortion failed by 3%, 5%. I'm not a huge pro-abortion person, but I think the progressives, as there's a generational change of the guard with the boomers passing on, I think that marijuana and abortion will be liberalized in the state of Florida. Just wait a decade or two. We'll be fine. I want to move to the trees and practice my wood ritual. Okay. God, please forgive Celeste Plantagenet York. She knows not what she does, okay? I think the pot stinks and I would never do it, but it should be legal. Yeah. I don't think people should. The same way alcohol. Alcohol has all these negative health and societal consequences. It's not illegal because plenty of people consume it. And also there's plenty of people who consume it responsibly. I think that with marijuana, despite there being effects, like increase in schizophrenia and all that kind of stuff, what it's going to boil down to is responsible consumption. So, yeah.
Trump. I am genuinely curious how somebody of your politics and your religious background interprets somebody like J.D. Vance. I'm asking you questions about it.
Christianity does not provide some kind of incredibly strong bulwark against powerful people doing the kinds of things that powerful people do, which means, self-interested conquest of various kinds and so on, right? What it does provide is an ongoing internal critique that those powerful people have to wrestle with and address in ways that are fairly unique in the historical relationship of, power and piety. So if you look at something like, to take the most famous example, maybe the Spanish conquest of the Americas, right? In terms of what is actually done in the course of the Spanish conquest of the Americas, you can find, plenty of terrible crimes that you, Ezra Klein, would say, well, what good is your religion if it licenses, if your civilization commits these kind of crimes? But from the very beginning, in Spain itself, in the heart of super Catholic, counter-Reformation era Spain, there's an ongoing and agonizing and, sometimes intensely legal and practical, sometimes high-level philosophical, theological debate that subjects the behavior of the Spanish conquistadors and others to this kind of sustained critique and leads to, at various times, sometimes successful, mostly unsuccessful, reform efforts driven by the Catholic monarchy of Spain, and ultimately builds out and influences everything from the anti-slavery movement in the 18th and 19th century that's ultimately successful down to contemporary ideas about human rights and international law that, again, today's secular liberals take for granted as a kind of scripture. All of that emerges out of the efforts of serious Christians in a context of profound historical temptation and constant sinfulness to sort of generate from within the resources of their religion And I think, if you take the Trump administration, for instance, it's not as though, you cannot find Christian critiques of Trump administration cruelty. They just are.
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting point that I'm going to reinforce. So there's a guy that I brought up, that DGG, Destiny's Community. They were like, "Oh, who Megalol?" They were like, "Who was this guy? Who are you talking about?" And he's not very well known, but he should be better known. Bartolomé de las Casas. So what happened, if I remember correctly, was that this was a guy, a priest, who traveled along with Spanish conquistadors, and he had a very irreverent opinion of Native Americans. And what happened was, because he was a fellow traveler with Native Americans, and he was a fellow traveler with conquistadors who were enslaving, murdering, raping, kidnapping Native Americans. There was a priest, I think, if I remember the story accurately, there was a priest who refused him communion. He said, I'm not going to give you communion because effectively you wake up every single day and you support and enable evil. And so that started like a shock, like a crisis of faith for Bartolomé de las Casas. And he actually analyzed what the Spanish colonial efforts were doing. And he believed that what they were doing was evil. And so he became one of the first lawyers on behalf of Native Americans as early as the 1500s. And he started fighting for human rights for Native Americans in the New World. I think he was ultimately only partially vindicated, but he's been vindicated by history, where as early as there was American colonization, there was a man who saw the horrors of American colonization and fought for the dignity of universal humanity. And so when, Ross Douthat is arguing that as soon as American colonization happened and there was these horrific crimes committed in the name of Christianity, there were conscientious Christians who recognized the horror and the evil, and they fought against it with every ounce of political and social power that they had. It's true. It's true. Do you believe in God, bro? I believe in God. Yeah, I believe in God. I'm not a religious literalist. I don't believe in specifically like Islam, Judaism, or Christianity or pagan interpretations of God. I think there's a fundamental creative force that set the world into creation and order, and we observe what's good for life through observations of the natural consequences of our actions. And then we observe what's bad for life through the observation of the consequences of our actions. And then we codify that through history, religion, and law. And I think that human beings who completely ignore both the law and religion and scripture, maybe not both, maybe if they ignore all of that, and then they also ignore the consequences of their actions when they give in to nihilism and hedonism, I think they're repeating sins and rebellions against nature that are as old as the human species. So, yeah, I believe in God. I don't know if God believes in me, but I believe in God. Edible hangovers are worse than alcohol. I've done it twice. Yeah, each time I've done edibles, I've done very low potency edibles, and that was fine. But I did like pretty hardcore edibles, and I did have a psychotic break as well. So I was like, maybe it's not worth it anymore. Maybe I shouldn't travel into the dream realm using edibles. So I stopped.
Are not at the moment the primary thing. I would expect, I mean, we'll find out, right? We're 3 months into a kind of shock and awe administration. I think that, and people have been sort of baffled and surprised by some of the turns that things have taken. But certainly people I take seriously within conservative Christianity have spoken out against things like, the cuts to humanitarian aid or anything like that. But again, I completely agree with you that history supplies constant tests of what your religion is until the end, right? To the testing. And sometimes you succeed. More often you fail, but hopefully you do something that has good effects down the road. And sometimes you fail entirely, and then maybe God sifts you and finds you wanting. I'm not kidding here, right? That this is actually like, it is important to see every moment as a potential moral test that you might well be failing. I'm a conservative Christian. You could say I'm a member of the Christian right for your purposes, right? As Christianity has weakened in American life, a really hard question has become like, who is the most dangerous of your different enemies? Or, like who is most threatening to the Christian view of the good society, right? Is it, a woke progressivism that wants to, again, this would just be the narrative, right? I think it has, wants to abolish basic ideas about differences between the sexes, that supports, abortion at any stage in pregnancy, that's hostile to the basic religious liberties of Christians, again, from the conservative Christian point of view? Is it Donald Trump's populism with its heathen cruelties? Is it transhumanism? Like, is the final boss of this era that religious believers will have to confront actually Silicon Valley? And if it is, like, can you make alliances within Silicon Valley? Is it better to be with Elon Musk and his 117 children than to be with, some other people involved?
He's also, Neuralink it's pushing transhumanism forward very fast if it can.
There's a lot of but there's also different transhumanisms, like which, anyway, these are things, that I myself am profoundly uncertain about in this moment. Like, what is the greatest danger from a Christian perspective to the future of the human race?
Well, yeah, this is actually a crazy. I always deal with sociopaths and morons who popularize their propaganda to the masses, whereas I feel like this is actually like the really introspective and intelligent analysis of like politics, right? So, who is the greatest threat to Christianity? It's obviously not right-wing heathenism, because right-wing heathens are willing and able to use Christianity, the symbols of Christianity, in order to propagate their message. So they're more fellow travelers than they are a direct threat, which I kind of understand why there's been this unholy alliance between right-wing pagan heathen freaks, no offense, because I find this particularly hypocritical, because these people are massive pieces of shit. Andrew Tate is a huge piece of shit. Elon Musk is less of a piece of shit, but still a piece of shit. So I find this alliance between Christian nationalists and right-wing heathens particularly distasteful. I think it's borderline evil. It's against everything I was raised to believe, and so I find it evil. But I do understand how anti-theist progressivism seems like a bigger threat, because it's so culturally dominant. As soon as you leave the right-wing sphere, as soon as you leave the comforts of a conservative society, you are overwhelmed by a liberal and progressive anti-theistic message in popular culture. And so as a result, anti-theist progressivism is infinitely more an immediate and powerful threat to religiosity from a Christian perspective. And then transhumanism, Oscar Steen says, gotta go. I've been enjoying the stream. Is there a schedule for the Valor Media Network streams? Yeah, 9:30 to 2:30, Monday through Friday for the most part. On Tuesdays, I am on my home channel, Counterpoints. Just typing Counterpoints common spelling into it. You'll probably find my Warhammer channel first, but you should also be able to find my politics channel. But Monday through Friday, 9:30 to 2:30, you'll be able to catch me live. And we'll probably be doing this for, yes, EST. To be fair, Christianity has been used to abolitionists. Am I not a brother? Enslavers, black people are from, the ham. Yeah, I agree. I don't think the threats to Christianity have caught up with the political and cultural landscape. And then transhumanism, he says, like, is this the final boss? And that's actually what's interesting, is that I think that anti-theist progressivism in liberal society's tolerance of that is probably the largest, most immediate, and most obvious threat to Christian conservative life in the United States of America. But I do think that transhumanism is a particularly like pernicious evil, where if you have, I don't know, Elon Musk effectively advocating for CRISPR or Neuralink or robotic transhumanism or immortality, that's obviously breaking humans away from the spiritual covenant, from the spiritual contract that was given to them through God and the Bible. So again, I'm not a literalist, but I understand how transhumanism would be a substantial threat in the long term. But anti-theist progressivism, again, is the most immediate and aggressive threat to Christian conservative political power. 100%. Okay. Escape from New York, Kurt Russell. I don't know why you're saying that, but obviously that's one of the most handsome men to ever exist. That the most handsome part of his life. Andrew Tate or Vosh, which way Western liberal? Yeah, literally. Andrew Tate or Vosh, which way Western Christian? That's absolutely true. 100% true. Religious trauma is real. Yeah, sure. Doesn't mean that religion isn't a vehicle for obvious moral codes that are beneficial to the human species. So just because religion hurt you doesn't mean that it wasn't also good for you. It's like eating broccoli, right? Broccoli is disgusting. However, it's also really, really, really good for you. The final boss of Christians comes from within Christianity. Maybe. Depends on how you view like literalism. I would say literalism is a poison. My view is that we should put religion in the same place culturally that we put Roman Greek mythology. Interesting and help shape the world, but not something to take literally or base governments on. Yes and no. Yes and no. So I think that you should take religion seriously as a vehicle of human morality, and literalists should be allowed to be literalists in the fact that as long as they're conducting themselves in a moral and non-criminal way, that's totally fine. However, if literalists start using their literalism in order to violate the law, then I think that's where you need to check it by a broader liberal framework. I was actually going to bring this up earlier. So the problem, if you look at ancient Greece was divided up between many political powers and many theologies and ideologies. And those theologies and ideologies were conflicting. And so a unified political and military power like Rome was able to steamroll Greece because Greece was so syncretic that they weren't able to unify. There's other reasons, but that's one of the reasons, right? And so when you look at liberalism, if you do not have a passionate and militant defense of liberalism, it can be co-opted and taken down by ideologies that it tolerates within its framework. So, yeah. Razzle says, I vibe with Professor Dawkins on this stuff, even when he admitted to being a cultural Christian, meaning he admits that living in a Christian-influenced society is better than some of the alternatives. Yeah, Dawkins is just an edgelord. He's just an edgelord, and in my opinion, kind of a douche. If you like him, that's totally fine. I find if you want to be atheistic, that's totally fine. I myself am kind of like an agnostic deist. I guess I'm more of a deist than I am agnostic, but agnostic deism wouldn't be something that I would fight as a title. I think anti-theism is super cringe. I think anti-theism is crazy cringe when you just like spend every day of your waking life being like, God isn't real. It's stupid. It's mythology. You're dumb. Like, dude, I hate those people with every fiber of my being. Yeah. Atheism is based, just don't tip the fedora. I still think atheism is cringe. You still emanated, even within the atheist framework, your existence is an accident. It's an accident of nature. I think that's cringe. I think that you're not an accident of nature. You're in intention of nature. So, yeah. All right. Anyways, Sympathy says, hey, I don't say God bless you. I say science bless you because science blessed us. Cringe. It's okay. It's funny. You're being a Reddit atheist. I get it. I have nothing against God. It's man-made religion that I have a problem with. Yeah, same. Connor needs to touch some grass and eat some broccoli. I mean, I agree there. My wife is going to pick up some of the kids from school. We're watching some kids while their parents are coming to pick them up. So she's going to do that, and I got the baby monitor watching the baby, so I might have to touch some grass in a minute. But anyways, I'm going to let this play. I'm going to use the restroom, get a refill, and then we're going to keep pushing with the content.
I'm not entirely sure.
So a big part of your book, as I read it, is about what happens when elite society becomes hostile in its view of the world to the human impulse to seek a picture of reality that runs deeper than materialism. What happens when the seekers have nowhere to go, when organized religion weakens, when, or not know where to go? What happens when they're not channeled into organized religion? And what happens when elite society becomes too materialistic? And I understand for you, and you can tell me if this is wrong, that one of the forces I think that you believe is driving the era is a kind of frustrated seeking, a sort of desire to re-enchant the world, like that has run into an elite culture, maybe its apex being the Obama administration and that sort of moment in American life.
It's the Ezra Klein show.
The
It's
Ezra
the
Klein
apex,
show.
Ezra, let's be honest here.
Although that, well, we'll get into this. I always joke the difference between you and me is more that you're a Catholic and I'm a Californian than that I'm a materialist and you're not. Because
one can use the word materialist in different ways.
Sure.
Too.
When you use it in this context, what do you mean?
I mean the view that all of existence, life, the universe, and everything is finally reducible to matter in motion. That matter is primary and mind is secondary rather than the other way around. I don't mean materialism in terms of, Madonna's Material Girl or something like that, although the two can be connected. So one of the various arguments in my book, right, is that disenchantment is fake, fundamentally, right? The idea that you can enter a secular age where once upon a time people had wild religious experiences, but now we inhabit the iron cage of modernity and all of those are off the table. That just doesn't describe reality. Mystical experience, religious experience, it's not just the impulse. Like, I think secular liberals are very comfortable saying, oh, well, there's always a religious impulse, but it's more than that. It's that people have encounters with God, whatever God may be, some kind of higher reality that enters them and transforms them and gives them visions and gives them intense experiences, or maybe they have them on the verge of death and come back to tell about them. This is just a feature of human life. It's a very profound and important feature of human life. Maybe it can be explained in non-religious terms. Maybe there's some reductive explanation, but there isn't a good one on offer right now. And so the persistence of that means that religion always regenerates itself, because even under conditions where almost nobody is committed to a particular church or creed, people are going to go on having, dramatic encounters, right? Like someone like, Barbara Ehrenreich, who's famous.
I had her on for this book.
Right. Famous left liberal writer, wrote a whole book called...
And a famous atheist.
Yes, famous atheist called Living with a Wild God, right? And it was just a book about a very secular person who had a lot of religious experiences, like experiences that if you went and read William James or read like a medieval Catholic mystic or something would be totally familiar. And she, didn't have sort of a framework, a conceptual framework to fully process them, and wrote a great book, really interesting book about it.
Can you tell the story that you tell in your book? I don't remember the man's name, but he's the editor of Skeptics magazine or something like that.
Right. So this is Michael Shermer, who is one of the more famous professional skeptical debunkers of religious claims, supernatural things, and so on. And he, in one of his books, but he's told this story several times to his great credit, he was getting married and his wife had, I'm going to butcher this slightly, but had a great uncle who had been very close to her and was the kind of person who would have given her away at the wedding, but had passed away, right? So she was feeling sort of lonely and isolated, and they had a radio that had come from him, and the radio was broken, didn't work, had never worked. Shermer had tried to fix it. It just didn't work. It was broken, right? And at the end of the wedding, during the reception, they heard music from the back of the house and went back into a back room, and there was the radio playing a love song. And I think it like transitioned from that to some kind of classical music for the later in the evening, and then shut off and never worked again. And this experience, affected Shermer. And again, to his credit, right? It was like evidence against interest. And I think, again, you have to sort of trust, as always with these stories, right? You have to sort of trust his general reliability and so on, that it wasn't just that like, there was a battery that was jiggled or something. Like the radio really didn't work and really never worked again. There really was no obvious material way that this could have happened. Shermer in the end works out, he wants to have a theory of the multiverse where in some different timeline, much like in the movie Interstellar, his wife's great uncle is capable of accessing our timeline. And to Shermer, this is sort of an escape from like supernatural explanations. But one reason to just tell that story is that, as I think you you know, because I was joking about your show being the epitome of secularization, the apogee, whatever. People have experiences like this all the time. Right?
Yeah, this is why I'm not a materialist.
Right. This is a very commonplace kind of experience. Not super commonplace. You're not going to have one tomorrow, probably. But like this stuff, you know, just is.
Yeah. So sorry, I was listening to the story because it was entrancing, and obviously I do want to, you know, give them time to cook, so to speak. I've had all sorts of stuff like this, at least probably a half dozen times throughout my life, and that I would say that's partially why I'm a deist. I don't know if there's an afterlife. My suspicion is that, you know, even if you do have an afterlife, like you have an alternative plane of existence, like I talked about earlier, where you go to this like heavenly hug from God. I ultimately think that probably what happens, I think the universe is probably cyclical. And so what'll happen is eventually that hug will fade and you'll, you know, go into kind of a like sleepy oblivion, effectively, you know, sleep without dreaming, right? The kind of oblivion that you experience every night where you're in that weird dream state where you don't really exist and you're just kind of gone for a few hours. I think that's probably what death is like. And I do think that it's entirely possible that with the universe being cyclical, I think the universe is probably cyclical, that we might be having this conversation 26 billion years from now. You know, we've been around for 13 billion years. The universe will probably be around for another 13 billion years. And then after that, the universe will probably, you know, die and then it'll kick off again because it's already happened once. We already know that it's happened once, right? And so as a result, these religious experiences, you know, I've had revelations where I've thought about my life, where it is, what I'm doing, where it's going to go, et cetera, et cetera. And then I've had effectively what felt like paths revealed to me, where when I was in a moment of emotional and spiritual crisis, I just kind of stopped and I thought for a minute, and then boom, some kind of click, some kind of revelation just fires off in my brain. And I can basically see my future, not my specific future, right? But I can see a path that's laid out in front of me, as if, you know, I'm not saying the creator of the universe does this. It could be just be a part of my brain, but it feels like a path is just rolled out in front of me. And I know it's the right path. And so I pursue that path. And to be honest, that happened to me probably most recently when I was like 25. And I've been on that path since. So yeah, I've had what's close to religious revelations. I also saw a ghost in Okinawa, Japan. Believe it or not, Okinawa, Japan is one of the most haunted places on the planet. We were playing music, getting drunk, having a good time. And then a speaker that I swear to God is like 20 pounds was on top of a wall locker. And then the speaker's blasting music. Nobody's touched it, no nothing. And then it effectively just flies across the room, crashes on the ground. And nobody had touched it. And I was just thinking to myself, like, what the hell? What the hell did I just see? And so I'm a fairly rational dude. So I'm looking for like a rational explanation. I'm looking for a cord that we tripped on. I'm looking for like the other side of the wall. Did somebody bang something on the other side of the wall and knock the speaker off? And I swear to God, I just have no explanation for it. There was a speaker that was on top of a wall locker. Nobody was touching it. And then all of a sudden it flew across the room and smashed into the ground. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to say about it. I don't know what it was. I'm just telling you what I saw. So kind of crazy. Sacred Snow says, thanks for covering the Vosh segment. Enjoy the family's natalism talk. I hate how the topics become taboo because of extremist reactionaries. Yeah, of course, Sacred Snow. I live to serve. Was it one of those Japanese ghosts? Did it come out of your TV? Nope. I didn't see any like human body or anything like that. I didn't see any shadows. I didn't see any of that. But did you ever consider magnets? Yeah, of course. But who's screwing with the magnets? What magnets are being screwed with? Right? I'm with you. Sacred Snow says, got to drive home from work, but we'll be listening. Have a good day, everyone. Sacred Snow, thank you for hanging out with us. Obviously, like the stream. I appreciate you. That's Camp Hansen. I'm from Japan. Akigara is the scariest forest on the planet. Yeah, I wasn't on Hansen. Hansen was for grunts. I was on Kinzer and Foster, and the speaker flying across the room was in Camp Kinzer at the barracks by the beach by the track. That's where it was. I could show you, if I flew out to Japan, I could show you the room where it happened. Everywhere except nations that have secular governments. Yeah. You guys are still talking about religion and stuff. Thoughts on aliens? No, I mean, they probably exist. I just don't think they're here. Like, I think there's probably aliens who have some level of like extrasolar travel and are technologically sophisticated. But I think that if they were here, they would have already revealed themselves. I think I thought the UFO thing might have been aliens, but then obviously when the UFOs are drones who have FAA approved lights on them, they're probably human, right? Kesoko says, we are speaking about Islam as a whole, and it needs to undergo a reformation period in which they can choose to travel a more peaceful path through the future like Christianity. Sure. And there's a peaceful alternative for Islam, which is effectively what I would call chill Islam, which is believe in God, believe in the last day, believe that Muhammad is God's messenger, and do good works. I think those are like the 4 pillars of Islam that you must believe in order to be Muslim. And I think that we get messed up because of the geopolitical realities of the fact that not only are we in conflict with Islam or Muslims in the Middle East and North Africa over territorial disputes, energy disputes, materialism, hedonism, all that kind of stuff, but they view atheism and paganism, like Hinduism, as evil. They cannot tolerate atheism and they cannot tolerate paganism because it's specifically prohibited in the Quran. And then dealing with those facts, along with Muhammad being a secular leader who said the world would not know peace until the entire planet was unified in Islam. Christians and Jews can be tolerated as people of the book, but everybody else effectively has to convert. I think there's a fundamental conflict there, but I think chill Muslims can exist and they can believe in God, the last day, and the judgment associated with the last day. Muhammad is God's messenger and they can do good works. And that's sufficient for them to be good Muslims and good neighbors. So that's what I would do. Silver Jacket Man says, I legit ghost hunt as a hobby. I suck at it. I've never seen anything. I just spent a weekend at the Vayiska Axe murder house. Jesus, you're kind of crazy, huh? You guys are having fun. You guys are having fun fighting about religion and philosophy and ghosts in chat. There's 5 pillars, you kafir. Well, let's take a look at them real quick. Let's take a look. 5 pillars of Islam. Let's make sure that I didn't miss one that is contradictory to civilization. Shahada, declaration of faith, salah, prayer, zakat, almsgiving, fasting, and pilgrimage. Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about necessarily. These are the things that a Muslim should do during their life in order to be considered like a good Muslim. So the declaration of faith, there's no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. Okay. Salah, prayer, praying 5 times a day. Zakat, which is tithes. Psalm, fasting, which is Ramadan. And then Hajj, if you are physically and financially able, traveling to Mecca. So yeah. The fact that Hassan Piker hides behind being culturally Muslim and he's a multimillionaire and he's never done a Hajj is actually like offensive to me. It's offensive to me that he cares so much about the plight of the Palestinians and he cares so much about the plight of Muslims worldwide. And he has like millions of dollars and he's a young, physically capable person and he hasn't done the Hajj. That actually, like, it offends me. He doesn't need to live stream it. He just needs to do it. The Draco reptilians are here for sure. Look what's happening in this country. Yeah. Ved Sunil says the aversion to polytheism makes me hate Islam as an ideology. Yeah, they hate you too. That's a sad thing. You know, if you're an atheist or a pagan, that's pretty much the worst thing you can be. You could be a pedophile and still get treated better in Islam than you can if you're an atheist or a pagan. When Muslims dominated, government stopped executing apostates, gays, and sorcerers, I'll be more optimistic. Yeah, sure. It's going to take time. Who is more Muslim between Hassan and Sneeko? I think unironically Sneeko. Sneeko seems to actually struggle with faith and materialism and hedonism. Hassan just seems to do it and not care. I think Sneeko, weirdly enough, I know that we had a segment where we watched Sneeko being a piece of garbage, but Sneeko, unironically, I've watched other content of him. He seems to be struggling with who he is, his role in the world, what he truly believes, what kind of positive impact he can have. And then, of course, he's constantly trapped up by materialism and hedonism and partying and all that kind of crap. So Most pro-pallies never bring up Uyghurs because they ally with tankies. Yep, 100%. Oh, they'd throw me off the closest tall building as soon as possible. Yeah, probably. Culture Muslim is effing BS and pisses me off. That isn't real. Islam is a religion, not an ethnicity. Yeah. It took me a while, though. I'm not going to lie. Even when I got back from the military, I'd participated in the war on terror. I knew plenty about weapons, technology, logistics, software programs. I was an intelligent and young person who probably knew history more than the average bear. Even I conflated the word Arab with Muslim, and I used Arab as a catch-all for all people from North Africa and even people in Afghanistan. And that's like a wildly inaccurate description of ethnicity and religion. But because America, effectively through the 1980s and really into the 2000s, really only associated Islam with like jihadist terrorism and also associated with like Saudi Arabia, Arab became a catch-all term for all Muslims in the Middle East and North Africa. And of course, it's a religion and then an ethnicity. And then there's like dozens of ethnicities in North Africa and dozens of ethnicities in Asia. So trying to differentiate that mentally is actually kind of, you have to parse it apart. Isn't Hassan agnostic? No idea. I don't watch him enough to do it. I'm going to read a few more and then I'm going to give them another few minutes. I'm not a big fan of Islam. This is one of the issues that separates me from center-left liberal from far-left progressives. How and why the left has embraced it is beyond me. Yeah, it's literally just because they're lower in the oppression hierarchy. Andrew Paris says, I think it can be cultural parts of religion that don't require you to be religious. It's certainly common amongst Jews. Yeah, there's plenty of Jews who vaguely know things about Judaism and their ethno-religious heritage, but they're not practicing, but they identify as Jews, 100%. When someone is culturally Christian, it's Christian nationalism, identitarian, but when someone is culturally Muslim, it's a minority defending their identity. I don't know if that's entirely true. Like, I would consider myself culturally Christian. From 0 to 18, I spent every Sunday in church, and my wife and I go to church even though I'm not a religious literalist. And I still enjoy sermons and songs because I look at them mythologically or metaphorically rather than literally. So I would still say I'm cultural Christian, and I'm not a Christian nationalist. All right. Anyways, my brain is slowly getting fried. So let's give these guys like another really good hrumph. Let's give them one more opportunity to give us like a really good thing. And then honestly, I'm probably going to be wrapping up because I think my brain is turning into soup inside my skull.
Part of the warp and woof of reality. And so to finally long-windedly answer your original question, I think what happens in conditions when you have weak institutional religions and a sort of secular expert class that is not, militantly atheistic, but sort of says, officially these things don't happen, right? Is that people feel like they can't really go all the way up to the creator God, Yahweh, Jehovah, outside of time and space. And they start looking for sort of intermediate powers to sort of become a kind of locus for their own spiritual impulses. Stuff with psychedelics, stuff with literal paganism, including stuff on the right. And then the interesting zone in a way is AI, which is the place where sort of science fiction ideas or scientific ideas meet a kind of, slightly supernaturalist sense of, like the machine God as this power that into which we are going to commend ourselves. But yeah, I think that tendency, again,
dude, I love that like Warhammer 40K transhumanist references, and I'm not saying he's literally referencing Warhammer 40K, but obviously there's a transhuman cybernetic pan AI that the some transhuman bros believe in, and there's science bros who are trying to figure out how to digitize consciousness and then upload their consciousness into the machine god. And they're effectively, there's an excellent game. I don't know if you guys ever have played it, but it's called Deus Ex. It's an amazing game with obviously like being Deus Ex Machina being the fundamental concept, which I don't even think I understand the concept of Deus Ex Machina. Deus Ex Machina, an unexpected power or event saving a seemingly hopeless situation, especially as a contrived plot device in a play or a novel. Okay, but what's so funny about the game Deus Ex, okay, is what happens is you are a cybernetic agent. The very first one, I haven't even played the other ones. I like this one the best, obviously. But JC Denton is a cybernetic agent working for the government who hunts down anti-technology rebels who despise him as a transhuman freak. And then what ends up happening is he uncovers like a conspiracy against the entire planet where a giga-rich billionaire cabal of the Illuminati, offshoot of the Illuminati called Majestic 12, if I remember the story correctly, an offshoot of Majestic 12 has a guy who's trying to upload his consciousness into an AI program that is going to control the entire planet's information. And so he's hoping effectively to become the machine god of planet Earth. And it actually leaves you with an option. You can either destroy the project entirely and let humanity thrive or die as, you know, it will. You can kill the god machine guy and take his place and become a god machine yourself and then effectively control the whole planet. Or you can help that guy become a god machine. So it's actually really funny hearing this guy randomly talk about the god machine and the concept of like a human consciousness becoming a combination of like cybernetics, AI, and the internet. Because what's funny is like a solar flare would 100% take that out. So there's like a lot of transhumanists who think that they are going to be able to digitize their consciousness and then upload themselves into the internet and then have like cybernetic bodies and live in perpetuity. Number one, I have a deep suspicion that the digital replication of your consciousness is not going to be you. Like it's not going to feel like you actually transported your soul. It's just going to be a digital copy of you, not really you. And then also the second that there's a solar flare or some kind of like destruction of the planet, that digital copy of you is going to get wiped out as well. So transhumanism is not going to save you. It's cool. I think it's cool, but it's not going to save you. So, sorry, just checking in with chat. Deus Ex Machina translates to God inside the machine. Deus Ex alone stands for God inside, by the way. Cool. My most spiritual experience was through being high, working out in the gym while listening to My Eyes by Travis Scott. Based. No, still stuck on Pong. True. You don't need to play any others. Seriously, straight downhill. Oh, yeah. The first one was like phenomenal. The graphics are so mid, but the story was so good. As far as I remember, Deus Ex Machina is from ancient Greece, where in plays it was common to have a lift that would lower a god into the play to resolve everything. Yep. There you go. I like having my own thoughts. Thanks. Yeah, exactly. That's what Dyson swarms are for. Interesting. Or maybe it was Roman. No, I'm with you. Greek and Roman culture has a very strong overlap. Connor, we have to find the Catan first. Duh. Then we're good to go. True. I want to be a cyborg. All right. Well, have fun, man. Have fun. But let let him finish Deus Ex Machina, and then I think I'm going to wrap up. So let's do
Christians would say, but that tendency is bad. It's not that secondary spiritual powers don't exist in the universe. There are, in fact, angels and demons and things like that, saints.
I'm happy I let him finish the sentence.
That tendency is bad. It's not that secondary spiritual powers don't exist in the universe. There are, in fact, angels and demons and things like
that. We live inside a 40K.
Like that, saints and powers that other powers perhaps more mysterious still, but not all of those powers have human good in mind, and it's better to approach them through one of the big old traditional religions that tries to subject them to a kind of higher ordering.
Let me hold you there, because we'll get to this.
Ooh, I don't want to get to this. That is it. How does one get these powers, Christian Valeris? Are you the Emperor of Mankind made flesh? Ooh, secondary spiritual and intercessory powers. How does one acquire these powers? You guys are crazy. Celeste Plantagenet, York, says transhumanism is the goal to wipe out humanity. Play it as the best thing, get humanity on board, then EMP, everyone's dead. I mean, seriously, yeah, like that. I'm not saying that we should do that, but I am saying a massive EMP would wipe out the digital species that replaced humanity. You sound like an Astartes before Horus Heresy. Demons are real, Connor. Wake up, they're real, dude. Yeah, there's always this human impulse to kind of like feel the proximity to God or the proximity to the supernatural. And so what this guy is saying is like, yeah, you can go to proximate powers, but they're not the one true God, which I think is crazy because it's not crazy. I think the reason why it's interesting is because he believes, potentially correctly, that of course, like Christians and Islam and Judaism, they're trying to worship the font of creation. They're trying to worship the initial force that set all of existence in order. But there are powers, like when you look at the pagan gods, there's the god of the storms, Zeus. There's the gods of war, Ares. There's the gods of love and beauty, like Apollo or Athena, and knowledge, like Apollo. And so as a result, you have these things that are outside of humanity that are older and stronger, and they might be conceptual. They might be like ephemeral, which is why most people take these things as mythology. But what's interesting about what Ross Douthat is saying, he's like, no, you can worship demons, you can worship lower level gods, but you are, you're selling your soul, which is a very like Warhammer 40K concept. Of course, Warhammer 40K takes its inspiration from religion and takes its inspiration from science fiction. So I'm not surprised that there's a thematic echo back into a deeply religious guy. But I do think that this thematic echo is very rarely talked about in church settings, in sermons. Very rarely will you hear a Catholic priest or a Baptist priest talk about how human beings can be trapped by secondary gods to the one true God. Raymond Smith says, see you, good show. Keep up the fight, bro. Y'all take the of you. Well, thank you, Raymond Smith. I don't understand fully the sentence, but I appreciate the emotion with which it's said. The Silver Dragon Man said, dude, there are whole books of Christian sorcery, like biblical spells. I own a few. It's basically coming down to you're throwing salt on a girl to get her to like you. I mean, that's how I got my wife. So, I mean, I guess there's something to it. All right, let's just listen. The dude's cooking, okay? The dude's cooking. Let's give it another second. See if he throws another Warhammer 40K, curveball our way.
I want to distinguish two arguments that the book could make, and that you take one path in particular. So I am somebody who believes deeply in mystery. I'm
All right. No more Warhammer 40K curveballs, okay? Let me go ahead and do a thank you to all you parasocial beautiful people. We had a few dozen people. I think we peaked out almost at 50. And, now we're down in the 30s, but I did mention several times that we're wrapping up. So I want to thank all the kind and beautiful souls who gave donations. Rises, Sapient Green, Sean Kaplan, who inspired this segment, which was fire. I hope he enjoyed it. Grassroots Hegemon, obviously one of the kindest donors and supporters of the channel. Celeste Plantagenet York, who was nice enough to spice up chat and give a donation. And Sacred Snow, thank you kindly for all your donations. Seriously, it's beautiful. It's beautiful to have this much support in such a tight community. It is nice. Which Christian spells do I use to get a wife? Isn't the magic the work of the devil? I mean, I think you need to pick up some salt and you need to say, be my wife. And then you throw it into her eyes. I think that's how you do it. Then Celeste says, there's this part in the show Britannia where two runaway Roman soldiers that get really high and have a discussion about all the different gods. It's so good. Yeah, shoot. Send me a clip. I'll take a look at it. I love, like I said, I'm not a literalist, okay? So my mom will be very disappointed if she watches this segment, but I don't know or believe that God, the creator of the universe, was like, humanity needs me specifically, and then he boiled down his essence into a fractal, and then he manifested as one human being with whom to share the message of Christianity. That I don't believe literally. However, I do think that human beings through the Iron Age and the Bronze Age and all that kind of stuff, they would have mystical and spiritual experiences, and they codified morality and they combined it with history, in order to make a compelling narrative of the human species as it evolved historically and culturally and morally. And then as a result, we should look at those stories in order to derive lessons for our own life, because the truth is that we haven't really evolved that much in the past 3,000 years. Of course, technology has changed. Of course, the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the sexual revolution, the information revolution, these have all drastically changed the ways with human beings interact with each other. But the truth is that there are moral questions and answers from 3,000 years ago that the Bible answers perfectly, and you would be a fool to ignore those lessons. So yeah, don't be a fool. Study religion, study the gods, study mythology so you can live a better life. That is my advice to you. Son Patty says, I can't believe how many people left over the Nintendo comment. That was hilarious. Dude, I lost like 5 or 10 people. Like, I don't know if somebody else went live or if legitimately they were offended. Like, they were like, fuck you, Cotter. I love Nintendo and I like degenerate pornography. I hope to be back. Well, Celeste, you're always welcome. We do have schizophrenics who populate our chat and do crazy stuff every now and then. So if it ever gets too schizophrenic, I'm not going to hold it against you if chat becomes a little bit too unruly for you to have a good time. But it was fun having you, and you definitely spiced up chat, so I appreciate it. Catholicism does warn against false idols. I agree. It's definitely something that's mentioned in the religion. It's definitely something that's mentioned in the Bible. I just don't think I've heard a lot of priests or preachers talk about it. So it's not so much that it's not within the religion. I just don't find a lot of priests. Like when I go to Sunday school, I don't hear somebody talking to my kids about how they shouldn't worship false gods because they're secondary ordered gods and demons in our plane of existence who might tempt you away from the one true God. That's obviously in the 10 Commandments, but it's not. I don't think priests and preachers talk about it because they almost prefer to pretend that worshiping the one true God is a presumed good, and therefore we don't even need to talk about it. All right. Anyways, parasocially love you guys. Hope you have a great day.